The story of Maya civilization begins not with grand pyramids or complex hieroglyphic texts, but with small bands of hunter-gatherers moving through the dense tropical forests of Mesoamerica around 2000 BCE. These early inhabitants of what would become the Maya heartland faced a challenging environment. The Petén Basin's swampy lowlands, interspersed with limestone hills and seasonal water sources, demanded adaptation and ingenuity for survival. Archaeological excavations at sites like Cuello in northern Belize and Cebol in Guatemala have uncovered evidence of these earliest settlements. Stone tools recovered from these locations show sophisticated knapping techniques, with obsidian blades sharp enough to process plant materials and hunt small game. The tool assemblages include scrapers, perforators, and cutting implements that suggest these groups were already developing specialized technologies for exploiting their forest environment. The transition from nomadic hunting and gathering to settled agricultural life occurred gradually over several centuries. At Cuello, archaeologists have identified distinct layers showing this transformation. The lowest levels contain scattered hearths and temporary shelters, while higher strata reveal post holes from more permanent structures and the first appearance of ceramic vessels. These early ceramics, dating to around 1200 BCE, display simple but functional designs, rounded bowls and jars with minimal decoration, crafted from local clay mixed with organic temper. The Pacific coastal regions tell a parallel story of early Maya development. Sites like La Blanca and Ujute in Guatemala reveal communities that exploited both marine and terrestrial resources. Shell middens at these locations contain remains of oysters, clams, and various fish species, while associated tool assemblages include net weights and fishing hooks carved from bone. The coastal peoples developed different pottery traditions from their inland counterparts, creating vessels with distinctive red-slip surfaces and incised geometric patterns. The revolutionary change that would transform these scattered communities into the foundation of Maya civilization was the domestication and intensive cultivation of maize. Wild teosinte, the ancestor of modern corn, grew naturally throughout Mesoamerica, but its transformation into a reliable food source required generations of selective breeding. Archaeological evidence from sites like Gila Naquit's cave in Oaxaca demonstrates that this process began as early as 7000 BCE in other parts of Mesoamerica, but maize cultivation reached Maya territories much later. The earliest definitive evidence of maize in Maya regions appears around 1500 BCE at sites in the Petén Basin. Carbonized kernels and cob fragments recovered from refuse pits show that early Maya farmers were cultivating varieties significantly larger than wild teosinte but still much smaller than later developed strains. Pollen analysis from lake sediments in the region reveals a dramatic shift in vegetation patterns around this time, with forest clearance indicators and the appearance of maize pollen in quantities suggesting systematic cultivation rather than occasional gathering. This agricultural revolution triggered profound changes in Maya society. Population estimates based on settlement patterns and refuse accumulation suggest that communities grew from small bands of 20-30 individuals to villages of several hundred people within just a few centuries. The reliability of maize harvests allowed for food storage, which in turn enabled population growth and the development of craft specialization. Archaeological evidence from El Mirador, one of the earliest major Maya centers, illustrates this transformation. The site's initial occupation around 1000 BCE consisted of simple thatched houses arranged around small plazas. Excavations in these early levels reveal grinding stones, storage pits lined with stone slabs, and large ceramic vessels clearly designed for processing and storing maize. Botanical remains from these contexts include not only maize, but also beans, squash, and chili peppers, the foundation crops that would sustain Maya civilization for millennia. The success of maize cultivation enabled the establishment of permanent settlements throughout the Maya region. Villages appeared along river valleys and around seasonal water sources, their locations carefully chosen to maximize agricultural potential while maintaining access to wild resources. At Nakba, another early centre in the Petun, archaeologists have traced the evolution from scattered farmsteads to a nucleated village with planned architecture and public spaces. The influence of the Olmec civilization, flourishing along the Gulf Coast of Mexico from approximately 1200 to 400 BCE, began reaching Maya territories during this formative period. The Olmecs had developed sophisticated artistic traditions, monumental architecture, and complex religious practices that would profoundly impact emerging Maya culture. Evidence of this influence appears in various forms across early Maya sites, marking the beginning of a cultural transformation that would shape Maya civilization's distinctive character. At La Venta, the major Olmec center, massive basalt heads weighing several tons demonstrated advanced stone carving techniques and organizational capabilities. These artistic achievements, along with Olmec innovations in jade working, ceramic production, and architectural planning, spread throughout Mesoamerica through trade networks and cultural exchange. Maya communities began adopting and adapting these influences, creating their own interpretations of Olmec artistic styles and ceremonial practices. The adoption of Olmec-influenced ceremonial centers represents one of the most significant developments in early Maya society. At sites like Nakbe and El Mirador, archaeologists have uncovered evidence of large-scale construction projects that required coordinated labor and centralized planning. These early ceremonial complexes featured raised platforms, plazas, and structures aligned with astronomical observations, elements that would become hallmarks of Maya architecture. The construction techniques employed at these sites reveal sophisticated engineering knowledge. Builders used locally quarried limestone, cutting blocks with stone tools and fitting them together without mortar. The platforms at Nakbe, some reaching heights of over 40 meters, required the movement and placement of thousands of tons of stone. Analysis of the construction sequence shows that these projects were completed in phases over several generations, suggesting long-term planning and sustained community commitment. Religious practices at these early centers show clear Olmec influence, while developing distinctly Maya characteristics. Jade objects recovered from ritual deposits at El Mirador include celts, beads, and figurines carved in styles reminiscent of Olmec art but incorporating local design elements. Ceramic incense burners found in ceremonial contexts display iconographic motifs that would later appear in classic Maya art, jaguar imagery, serpent forms, and geometric patterns associated with water and fertility. The emergence of social hierarchies during this period is evidenced by differential treatment in burials and variations in residential architecture. At Cuello, excavations have revealed a clear distinction between simple interments, containing only basic ceramic vessels and elaborate burials, accompanied by jade ornaments, obsidian blades, and imported goods. The most elaborate burial from this period contained over 200 jade beads, obsidian ear flares, and a ceramic vessel filled with cinnabar, a red mineral associated with elite status throughout Mesoamerica. Residential architecture at early Maya sites shows increasing differentiation between elite and commoner dwellings. While most houses remained simple structures with pole and thatch construction, some residences featured stone foundations, multiple rooms, and associated storage facilities. At Nakbe, the largest residential complex from this period, includes several interconnected structures arranged around private courtyards, with elaborate drainage systems and evidence of craft production areas. The development of long-distance trade networks facilitated the exchange of goods and ideas that accelerated Maya cultural development. Obsidian from highland Guatemala appears at lowland sites hundreds of kilometers from its source, while marine shells from both Pacific and Caribbean coasts are found at inland locations. These trade relationships required sophisticated logistics and established the commercial connections that would later support classic Maya civilization. Craft specialization emerged as communities grew larger and more complex. Evidence from workshop areas at various sites shows specialized production of stone tools, ceramics, and ornamental objects. At Colhar in Belize, extensive lithic workshops produced standardized obsidian and chert tools that were distributed throughout the region. The technical skill required for these productions, combined with the scale of output, indicates that craft specialists were supported by agricultural surpluses and operated within established economic systems. The political structures that governed these early Maya communities remain partially obscured by limited written records from this period, but archaeological evidence suggests increasingly complex organizational systems. The scale of construction projects at sites like El Mirador required coordination of labor forces numbering in the thousands, while the distribution of elite goods indicates systems for accumulating and redistributing wealth. Settlement patterns reveal the emergence of site hierarchies, with larger centers like El Mirador and Nakba surrounded by smaller villages and farmsteads. This arrangement suggests political relationships extending beyond individual communities, possibly representing early forms of regional integration that would later characterize Maya political organization. The artistic traditions that emerged during this formative period established many of the stylistic conventions that would define Maya visual culture. Stone monuments at early sites, while simpler than later classic period sculptures, already display the Maya preference for intricate detail and symbolic complexity. Ceramic vessels show increasing sophistication in both form and decoration, with painted designs that incorporate mythological themes and astronomical references. By 250 CE, the foundations of Maya civilization were firmly established. Agricultural techniques had been perfected to support large populations. Monumental architecture demonstrated advanced engineering capabilities, and complex social and political systems governed communities throughout the Maya region. The stage was set for the remarkable achievements of the Classic period, when Maya civilization would reach unprecedented heights of artistic, intellectual, and architectural accomplishment. The transformation of Maya society from scattered agricultural villages to sophisticated urban centers accelerated dramatically during the Middle and Late Preclassic periods. This evolution culminated in the construction of massive ceremonial complexes that rivaled anything built elsewhere in the ancient Americas, demonstrating organizational capabilities and engineering expertise that would define Maya civilization for centuries to come. El Mirador stands as the most spectacular example of late preclassic Maya achievement. Located in the remote northern Petén region of Guatemala, this sprawling metropolis covered over 650 square kilometers at its peak around 300 BCE to 100 CE. The site's monumental architecture dwarfs many later classic period centers, with the La Danta complex rising to a height of 72 meters, taller than most Maya pyramids built during the civilization's supposed Golden Age. The construction of these massive structures required quarrying, transporting, and precisely placing an estimated 2.8 million cubic meters of stone and fill material. Archaeological investigations at El Mirador have revealed the sophisticated planning behind these monumental projects. The Tigre complex, another major architectural group at the site, demonstrates careful attention to astronomical alignments and geometric proportions. Ground-penetrating radar surveys have shown that the builders incorporated complex drainage systems within the pyramid cores, preventing water damage and structural collapse during the intense rainy seasons. These engineering solutions required detailed understanding of local hydrology and structural mechanics that surpassed contemporary construction techniques elsewhere in Mesoamerica. The labor organization necessary for these projects indicates highly stratified social systems with powerful ruling elites capable of mobilizing thousands of workers over extended periods. Excavations in workshop areas around El Mirador have uncovered evidence of specialized craft production on an industrial scale. Stone tool manufacturing areas contain millions of chert and obsidian flakes, indicating standardized production techniques that supplied tools for both construction projects and daily use throughout the region. Ceramic workshops produced vessels in standardized forms and sizes, suggesting centralized control over production and distribution networks. The scale of construction at El Mirador required sophisticated logistical systems for feeding and housing massive labor forces. Agricultural terraces and raised field systems surrounding the site could have supported populations numbering in the tens of thousands. Causeways connecting different architectural groups within the site spanned several kilometers, demonstrating urban planning concepts that integrated residential areas, ceremonial precincts, and administrative centers into a cohesive urban landscape. Similar developments occurred at other late pre-classic centers throughout the Maya region. At Nakba, located 13 kilometers southeast of El Mirador, monumental construction began even earlier, around 600 BCE. The site's architecture displays many of the same sophisticated engineering techniques found at El Mirador, including complex corbel-vaulted rooms and precisely fitted masonry blocks. Stucco masks decorating the facades of Nakbi's temples represent some of the earliest examples of monumental Maya art, featuring jaguar and serpent motifs that would remain central to Maya iconography throughout the civilization's history. The construction techniques employed at these sites reveal advanced understanding of materials science and structural engineering. Builders developed methods for creating strong, lightweight concrete using local limestone, which they burned to produce lime mortar. This material, mixed with crushed stone aggregate and organic additives, created structures capable of supporting enormous loads while remaining flexible enough to withstand seismic activity. The precision of stone cutting and fitting achieved at sites like El Mirador required specialized tools and techniques that represented significant technological innovations. Concurrent with these architectural achievements, Maya scribes were developing the writing system that would become the most sophisticated in the pre-Columbian Americas. The earliest known Maya hieroglyphic inscriptions date to the late pre-classic period, appearing on portable objects and architectural elements at sites throughout the Maya region. A jade plaque from the Dumbarton Oaks collection, likely dating to the 1st or 2nd century CE, contains glyphic elements that clearly represent early forms of later classic Maya writing conventions. The development of Maya writing built upon earlier Mesoamerican traditions, while incorporating innovations that made it uniquely expressive and flexible. Unlike purely logographic systems, Maya writing combined logographs representing complete words or concepts with syllabic signs representing individual sounds. This mixed system allowed scribes to write any word in the Maya language phonetically, while also employing traditional symbolic representations for important concepts and names. Archaeological evidence from sites like San Bartolo, in Guatemala, provides crucial insights into the early development of Maya writing. Murals discovered in a late pre-classic temple at this site dating to around 100 BCE, contains some of the earliest known Maya glyphic texts alongside elaborate painted scenes depicting mythological narratives. The glyphs in these murals show clear relationships to later classic period writing conventions, indicating that the basic structure of the Maya writing system was already established by this time. The mathematical concepts underlying Maya intellectual achievements emerged during the same period. Maya mathematicians developed a vigesimal numbering system that incorporated the concept of zero as a placeholder, an innovation that occurred independently in only a few ancient civilizations worldwide. This mathematical sophistication enabled precise astronomical calculations and complex calendrical computations that would become hallmarks of Maya intellectual culture. The Maya calendar system, with its intricate interlocking cycles, reached its mature form during the late pre-classic period. The combination of a 260-day sacred calendar with a 365-day solar year created a 52-year cycle that governed ritual and agricultural activities throughout Maya society. This calendar-round system was supplemented by the long count, a linear dating system that tracked days from a mythological creation date corresponding to August 11th, 3114 BCE in the Gregorian calendar. The earliest known long count dates appear on monuments from the late pre-classic period, indicating that Maya astronomers had already developed the complex calculations necessary to track these extended time periods. Stela 2 from Chiapa de Corzo in Chiapas, Mexico, bears a long count date corresponding to 36 BCE, demonstrating that this sophisticated calendrical system was operational centuries before the classic period. Similar early long count inscriptions have been found at Tres Zapotes and other sites, showing the widespread adoption of these chronological innovations. Maya astronomical knowledge during this period extended far beyond simple calendar keeping. Observations of Venus cycles, lunar phases, and planetary movements were incorporated into religious and political activities. The Dresden Codex, though compiled much later, preserves astronomical tables that likely originated during the pre-classic period, including precise calculations of Venus synodic periods and eclipse prediction tables accurate to within minutes over centuries of observation. The religious beliefs and cosmological concepts that would define Maya spiritual life for over a millennium crystallized during the late pre-classic period. Archaeological evidence from sites like San Bartolo provides unprecedented insights into the development of Maya creation mythology and religious practices. The murals at this site depict scenes that correspond closely to narratives later recorded in the Popol Vuh, the 16th century Quiche Maya creation account, suggesting remarkable continuity in Maya religious traditions over nearly 2 millennia. The San Bartolo murals illustrate key episodes from Maya creation mythology, including the sacrifice and resurrection of the maize god, the establishment of the cosmic order, and the adventures of the hero twins. These painted narratives demonstrate that the fundamental structure of Maya religious belief was already established by 100 BCE, with sophisticated iconographic conventions for representing supernatural beings and mythological events. The artistic quality of these murals rivals the finest classic period examples, indicating that Maya painters had already achieved remarkable technical and aesthetic sophistication. Bloodletting and sacrifice emerged as central elements of Maya religious practice during this period. Archaeological evidence from various late pre-classic sites includes specialized tools for ritual bloodletting, including obsidian lancets, stingray spines, and perforators made from jaguar claws. These implements were often found in elaborate caches associated with temple dedications and other important ceremonies, indicating their sacred significance within Maya religious systems. The practice of human sacrifice, which would become increasingly prominent in later Maya society, has its origins in late pre-classic religious traditions. Excavations at sites like Kolhar in Belize have uncovered evidence of ritual killings associated with architectural dedications and calendar ceremonies. Skeletal remains from these contexts show evidence of heart extraction, decapitation, and other forms of sacrificial death that would become standardized in later Maya ritual practice. Maya cosmological concepts during this period emphasized the cyclical nature of time and the interconnectedness of the natural and supernatural worlds. The universe was conceived as a multi-layered structure, with the Earth occupying a middle position between celestial and underworld realms. The world tree, represented iconographically as a Kaba tree with its roots extending into the underworld and its branches reaching into the heavens, served as the central axis connecting these cosmic levels. The formation of Maya city-states during the late pre-classic period established political patterns that would characterize Maya civilization throughout its history. Unlike the unified empires that developed in other parts of Mesoamerica, Maya political organization remained fundamentally decentralized, with numerous independent polities competing for resources, territory, and prestige. This political fragmentation fostered cultural diversity and innovation, while also creating conditions for frequent warfare and diplomatic complexity. Archaeological evidence indicates that Maya city-states during this period were ruled by hereditary dynasties whose authority derived from both political power and religious legitimacy. Elite burials from sites like Tikal and Calakmul contain regalia and insignia that clearly distinguish rulers from other members of society. These burials often include jade masks, elaborate headdresses, and ceremonial weapons that symbolized the ruler's role as intermediary between human and divine realms. The development of interregional trade networks during the late pre-classic period connected Maya communities with distant regions throughout Mesoamerica and beyond. Obsidian from sources in highland Guatemala and central Mexico appears at lowland Maya sites in quantities indicating regular commercial relationships spanning hundreds of kilometers. Marine shells from both Pacific and Atlantic coasts were worked into ornaments and ceremonial objects found throughout the Maya interior, demonstrating sophisticated exchange systems that cross diverse ecological zones. These trade networks facilitated not only the movement of goods, but also the exchange of ideas, technologies, and artistic styles that enriched Maya culture. Ceramic traditions from different regions influenced local production techniques, while architectural innovations spread rapidly between distant sites. The standardization of certain artifact types across wide geographic areas suggests the existence of specialized trading communities that maintained regular contact between far-flung Maya centers. The trade in exotic materials like jade, obsidian, and cacao established economic relationships that would persist throughout Maya history. Jade sources in the Motagua Valley of Guatemala supplied raw materials for elite ornaments found at sites throughout the Maya region. The high value placed on jade in Maya society, where it was considered more precious than gold, created incentives for long-distance trade that connected highland sources with lowland consumers through complex networks of intermediaries. Cacao cultivation and trade emerged as particularly important economic activities during the late pre-classic period. Archaeological evidence from sites in the Maya highlands shows intensive cacao production in areas with suitable climate and soil conditions. Cacao beans served not only as the raw material for chocolate beverages consumed by Maya elites, but also as a standardized medium of exchange in commercial transactions. This dual role as luxury commodity and currency made cacao cultivation a cornerstone of Maya economic systems. The political implications of these trade relationships extended far beyond simple commercial exchange. Control over trade routes and access to exotic goods became sources of political power and social prestige that influenced the development of Maya political hierarchies. Rulers who could monopolize access to valuable trade goods gained advantages in diplomatic negotiations and military conflicts, while communities located along major trade routes often developed into important political centers. The political landscape of the Maya lowlands transformed dramatically as the Classic period unfolded, with ambitious rulers consolidating power through increasingly sophisticated administrative systems and monumental construction projects that proclaimed their divine authority. The transition from the late pre-classic centers like El Mirador to the Classic period powerhouses represented not merely architectural evolution, but fundamental changes in how Maya society organized itself politically, economically, and spiritually. Tikal emerged as the dominant force in the central Petun during the early Classic period, its rulers establishing a dynasty that would endure for over 6 centuries. The site's strategic location along ancient trade routes connecting the Caribbean coast with highland Guatemala provided access to obsidian, jade, and marine resources that fueled its economic expansion. Archaeological excavations in Tikal's North Acropolis have revealed a complex sequence of temple construction spanning multiple generations, with each ruler adding new structures while carefully preserving earlier monuments that legitimized dynastic continuity. The architectural program at Tikal during this period demonstrates unprecedented engineering ambition. Temple 4, completed around 741 CE but begun during the early Classic, reached a height of 65 meters above the forest floor, making it one of the tallest pre-Columbian structures in the Americas. The pyramid's construction required quarrying and transporting over 200,000 cubic meters of limestone blocks, with precision cut-facing stones fitted together without mortar, using techniques that ensured structural stability for over a millennium. The temple's interior chambers contained elaborate corbel vaults spanning widths previously thought impossible with Maya construction techniques. Recent architectural analysis has revealed that Tikal's builders developed innovative methods for distributing structural loads through carefully calculated stone arrangements that transferred weight from the vault springs to the pyramid's solid core. These engineering solutions required mathematical calculations and structural understanding that surpassed contemporary construction practices in most other world civilizations. Calakmul, located in the dense forests of southern Campeche, emerged as Tikal's primary rival during the Classic period, establishing what epigraphers have termed the superpower conflict that dominated Maya politics for centuries. The site's rulers adopted the emblem glyph Khan, meaning snake, which appeared in hieroglyphic texts throughout the Maya region as Calakmul extended its political influence through conquest, alliance, and diplomatic manipulation. Structure 2 at Calakmul, rising 45 meters above the surrounding plaza, served as both religious center and political symbol, its facades decorated with massive stucco masks representing the site's patron deities. The scale of Calakmul's urban development rivaled or exceeded that of Tikal, with over 6,000 structures mapped within the site core and extensive residential areas extending for kilometers into the surrounding forest. Causeways connected different sectors of the city, facilitating movement of goods and people while demonstrating the centralized planning that characterized classic Maya urbanism. The longest of these raised roadways stretched over 40 kilometers, connecting Calakmul with subordinate centers and creating an integrated political landscape under direct royal control. Palenque, nestled in the foothills of the Chiapas highlands, developed a distinctive architectural tradition that emphasized elegance and proportion over sheer monumentality. The site's builders took advantage of natural topography, constructing temples and palaces on terraced hillsides that created dramatic visual effects while solving practical problems of drainage and foundation stability. The palace complex at Palenque, with its unique four-story tower and intricate system of courtyards and galleries, represents one of the most sophisticated examples of Maya architectural planning. The engineering innovations at Palenque included advanced hydraulic systems that channeled mountain streams through the urban core, providing fresh water for the population while creating elaborate fountain displays in palace courtyards. Archaeological investigations have revealed that these water management systems incorporated settling basins, filtration chambers, and pressure release valves that maintained consistent flow rates throughout seasonal variations in rainfall. The technical sophistication of these installations required detailed understanding of hydraulic principles and precise construction techniques. The Temple of Inscriptions at Palenque, built as the funerary monument for Kinich Janab Pakal I, demonstrates the integration of architectural design with hieroglyphic programming that characterized classic Maya royal monuments. The temple's interior contains the longest known Maya hieroglyphic text, with over 600 individual glyphs recording the ruler's genealogy, military victories, and religious accomplishments. The text composition required coordination between architects, scribes, and stone carvers, working to precise specifications that ensured both structural integrity and textual coherence. Pakal's sarcophagus, discovered in a vaulted chamber beneath the temple floor, exemplifies the artistic achievements of classic Maya sculptors. The limestone slab covering the sarcophagus measures 3.8 by 2.2 meters and weighs approximately 5 tons, its surface carved with intricate scenes depicting the ruler's journey through the underworld and his eventual resurrection as the maze god. The iconographic program incorporates astronomical references, mythological narratives, and dynastic history in a unified composition that demonstrates the sophisticated symbolic thinking characteristic of Maya elite culture. Copan, located in the southeastern periphery of the Maya world in present-day Honduras, developed into a major center of learning and artistic production during the Classic period. The site's hieroglyphic stairway, completed around 755 CE, contains over 2,500 individual glyphs, forming the longest known Maya text, recording the military and political history of Copan's ruling dynasty over nearly 4 centuries. The stairway's construction required coordinating the work of master sculptors, scribes, and architects to ensure that the hieroglyphic narrative flowed coherently across 63 stone steps while maintaining structural stability. The sculptural program at Copan achieved levels of naturalism and technical refinement unmatched elsewhere in the Maya world. The site's stelae, particularly those erected during the reign of 18 Rabbit, display three-dimensional carving techniques that created almost freestanding figures from single blocks of volcanic tuff. These monuments required quarrying stone from sources located several kilometers from the site center, then transporting blocks weighing up to 25 tons using techniques that remain poorly understood by archaeologists. The Copan Acropolis contains architectural innovations that influence construction techniques throughout the southeastern Maya region. The structure's builders developed methods for creating large interior spaces using wooden beam and mortar roofs instead of traditional corbel vaulting, allowing for rooms with unprecedented floor areas and ceiling heights. These construction techniques required importing hardwood timbers from highland forests and developing new methods for anchoring wooden elements within stone masonry walls. The political dynamics governing relationships between these major centers involved complex webs of alliance, rivalry, and subordination that shifted constantly as rulers pursued territorial expansion and economic advantage. Hieroglyphic texts from multiple sites record a series of conflicts known to epigraphers as the Star Wars, named after the recurring star-over-Earth glyph that Maya scribes used to denote military conquest. These conflicts involved not only direct military confrontation, but also sophisticated diplomatic maneuvering designed to isolate enemies and secure strategic alliances. The warfare tactics employed by classic Maya armies combined traditional Mesoamerican weapons with innovations specific to forest environments and Maya military traditions. Warriors used obsidian-bladed clubs, atlatl dart throwers, and composite bows capable of penetrating wooden armor and cotton padding worn by enemy fighters. Archaeological evidence from fortified sites indicates that Maya military engineers developed sophisticated defensive systems including multiple wall circuits, concealed sally ports, and elevated firing positions that maximize defensive advantages while minimizing construction costs. The capture of enemy rulers represented the ultimate military objective in Maya warfare, providing not only political advantages, but also opportunities for elaborate public ceremonies that reinforced the victor's divine authority. Hieroglyphic texts describe the ritual humiliation and eventual sacrifice of captured kings, events that were commemorated in sculptural programs and architectural dedications throughout the victor's realm. The political implications of these captures extended far beyond individual conflicts, often triggering realignments of alliance systems that affected dozens of subordinate centers. Maya military organization during this period involved professional warrior classes supported by tribute obligations and specialized craft production. Elite warriors wore elaborate costumes, incorporating jaguar pelts, feathered headdresses, and jade ornaments that proclaim their status while serving practical functions in combat identification and psychological warfare. Archaeological evidence from elite burials indicates that successful military leaders accumulated wealth through warfare, acquiring exotic goods and tribute payments that supported increasingly elaborate lifestyles. The diplomatic systems that complemented military activities involved formal protocols for conducting negotiations, establishing alliances, and managing tribute relationships. Maya scribes developed specialized vocabulary for recording diplomatic activities, including terms for different types of treaties, tribute obligations, and ceremonial exchanges between rulers. These diplomatic relationships often involved marriage alliances between ruling families, creating kinship networks that extended across vast geographic areas and provided mechanisms for peaceful conflict resolution. The artistic achievements of the classic period reflected both technological innovations and evolving aesthetic preferences that emphasized narrative complexity and symbolic sophistication. Maya painters developed techniques for creating polychrome ceramics with mineral-based pigments that retained their colors for over a millennium. The most elaborate vessels, known as codex-style ceramics, featured painted scenes depicting mythological narratives, court ceremonies, and supernatural beings rendered with artistic skill comparable to contemporary manuscript illumination in otherworld civilizations. The iconographic programs decorating these vessels required extensive knowledge of Maya mythology, religious symbolism, and historical traditions. Scenes depicting the hero twins' adventures in the underworld incorporated astronomical references, calendrical calculations, and genealogical information that connected mythological narratives with contemporary political events. The complexity of these artistic programs indicates that Maya painters worked within sophisticated intellectual traditions that integrated multiple knowledge systems into coherent visual narratives. Maya sculptors during this period achieved unprecedented levels of technical sophistication in both relief carving and three-dimensional sculpture. The limestone lintels at Yaxchilan, carved during the late 8th century, demonstrate mastery of compositional techniques that created dramatic narrative scenes within the constraints imposed by architectural function and material properties. These sculptures required coordinating the work of quarrymen, rough shapers, and finish carvers working to precise specifications that ensured both artistic coherence and structural integrity. The astronomical knowledge that underpinned Maya intellectual achievements reached new levels of precision during the Classic period. Maya astronomers developed methods for predicting solar eclipses with accuracy rates exceeding 95% over multi-century periods, accomplishments that required systematic observation and mathematical calculations spanning multiple generations. The Dresden Codex preserves Venus tables that track the planet's synodic cycles with precision that differs from modern calculations by less than 2 hours over 500-year periods. These astronomical achievements supported religious and political activities that reinforced elite authority while providing practical benefits for agricultural planning and ceremonial scheduling. Maya rulers timed important political events, military campaigns, and architectural dedications to coincide with significant astronomical phenomena, creating associations between celestial events and terrestrial activities that reinforced concepts of divine kingship. The precision of these calculations required institutional support for astronomical observation and mathematical training that represented significant investments of elite resources. The mathematical innovations that enabled these astronomical achievements included positional notation systems, sophisticated fraction calculations, and algebraic methods for solving complex problems involving multiple variables. Maya mathematicians developed techniques for calculating compound interest, geometric progressions, and trigonometric relationships that facilitated architectural planning, trade calculations, and calendrical computations. These mathematical systems required educational institutions and professional specialists whose training and support represented major commitments by Maya ruling elites. The social stratification that characterized classic Maya society involved complex hierarchies extending from divine rulers through multiple levels of nobility, professional specialists, and agricultural workers. Archaeological evidence from residential excavations indicates that social status correlated with access to imported goods, architectural elaboration, and specialized craft products. Elite residences featured stone construction, multiple rooms, and private courtyards, while commoner houses remained simple structures with pole and thatch construction and minimal material possessions. The institution of divine kingship, expressed through the title Kuhul Ajor, meaning Holy Lord, provided ideological justification for political hierarchies while creating obligations for rulers to demonstrate their supernatural authority through successful warfare, monumental construction, and elaborate ceremonial performances. Royal courts included specialists in various fields, including scribes, astronomers, artists, and military commanders whose expertise supported the complex activities required for effective governance in classic Maya society. The daily life of Maya commoners during this period revolved around agricultural activities that provided both subsistence needs and tribute obligations to elite patrons. Archaeological investigations of rural settlements have revealed sophisticated farming techniques, including raised field systems, terraced hillsides, and forest gardens that maximized agricultural productivity while maintaining ecological sustainability. These farming systems required coordinated labour and technical knowledge that was transmitted through family networks and community institutions. Craft specialisation among commoner populations included pottery production, stone tool manufacture, textile weaving, and food processing activities that supplied both local needs and long-distance trade networks. Archaeological evidence indicates that many rural communities included part-time specialists who combined agricultural work with craft production, creating economic diversification that provided security against crop failures and market fluctuations. The products of these rural industries supported the elaborate material culture of Maya elites, while providing economic opportunities for commoner families. The demographic explosion that characterized the late Classic period transformed the Maya lowlands into one of the most densely populated regions in the pre-Columbian Americas. Archaeological surveys using advanced remote sensing technologies have revealed settlement densities reaching 300 people per square kilometre in core areas around major centres, with some regions supporting populations that approached the carrying capacity of tropical forest environments. The Mirador Calakmul karst basin alone contained an estimated 2 million inhabitants at its late Classic peak, creating urban concentrations that rivaled contemporary cities in China and the Islamic world. This population growth necessitated revolutionary changes in agricultural production systems that pushed Maya farming techniques to unprecedented levels of sophistication. The raised field systems, known as WITS, expanded dramatically during this period, with hydraulic networks covering thousands of square kilometres in the Candelaria River basin and other wetland areas. These engineered landscapes required coordinating the labour of entire communities to construct drainage canals, planting platforms, and water control structures that transformed seasonal swamps into year-round agricultural zones capable of supporting multiple crops annually. Archaeological investigations at the Pull Trouser Swamp in northern Belize have revealed the intricate engineering behind these agricultural systems. The raised fields, constructed by excavating canals and piling the extracted soil into elevated planting surfaces, created microclimates that extended growing seasons and increased crop yields. The canal system served multiple functions, providing water for irrigation during dry periods, facilitating transportation of agricultural products, and supporting aquaculture activities that supplemented plant-based food production with fish, turtles, and waterfowl. The construction of these agricultural systems required sophisticated understanding of hydrology, soil science, and ecological relationships. Maya engineers calculated optimal spacing between canals to ensure adequate drainage while maintaining soil moisture, designed water control gates that regulated flow rates during seasonal flooding, and developed crop rotation systems that maintained soil fertility over centuries of intensive cultivation. Pollen analysis from canal sediments indicates that farmers grew not only staple crops like maize, beans, and squash, but also managed forest gardens containing dozens of useful tree species that provided fruits, nuts, medicines, and construction materials. Terraced agriculture expanded dramatically on hillsides throughout the Maya region, with some areas containing continuous terraced landscapes extending for dozens of square kilometres. The terraces at Caracol in Belize demonstrate the massive scale of these undertakings, with over 200 square kilometres of hillsides modified through stone-faced retaining walls that created level planting surfaces while preventing soil erosion. The construction of these terraces required quarrying and placing millions of limestone blocks, with individual terrace walls extending for kilometres across rugged topography. The agricultural intensification that supported late Classic population growth also involved sophisticated soil management techniques that maintained productivity over extended periods. Maya farmers developed methods for creating artificial soils, known as terra preta, by incorporating charcoal, organic matter, and mineral additives that enhance fertility and water retention. These anthropogenic soils, identified through chemical analysis at numerous archaeological sites, supported crop yields significantly higher than natural forest soils and remained productive for centuries after abandonment. Forest management represented another crucial component of late classic agricultural systems. Maya communities maintained extensive forest gardens that combined food production with sustainable harvesting of wild resources. These managed forests contained higher densities of useful species than natural forests, with archaeological evidence indicating that farmers actively transplanted, pruned, and selectively bred trees and shrubs to optimize their productivity. The breadnut tree, ramon, was particularly important in these systems, providing protein-rich nuts that could be stored for extended periods and served as famine reserves during crop failures. The political systems that governed late classic Maya society achieved unprecedented complexity through the elaboration of royal courts that functioned as sophisticated administrative centers. The concept of divine rulership, expressed through the title Kuhul-Ajar, evolved into a comprehensive ideology that integrated political authority with religious legitimacy and supernatural power. Rulers claimed direct descent from gods, particularly the maize god and various solar deities, creating genealogical narratives that justified their political dominance while obligating them to maintain cosmic order through ritual performance and successful governance. The royal courts that surrounded these divine rulers included elaborate hierarchies of nobles, administrators, and specialists whose titles and functions are preserved in hieroglyphic inscriptions throughout the Maya region. The Sahal, or subordinate lords, served as provincial governors, military commanders, and diplomatic representatives who extended royal authority throughout the territories controlled by major centers. These nobles maintained their own courts, complete with administrative staffs, military retinues, and craft specialists, creating nested hierarchies that could effectively govern territories spanning thousands of square kilometers. Archaeological excavations in elite residential areas have revealed the material culture associated with these noble courts. At Capan, the Las Sepulturas group contained over 100 structures housing noble families and their retainers, with architectural elaboration and artifact assemblages that clearly distinguished different ranks within the aristocratic hierarchy. The most elaborate residences featured multiple courtyards, private ball courts, and specialized buildings for administrative activities, while lesser nobles occupied simpler but still substantial stone structures with carved decorations and imported luxury goods. The administrative systems that supported late classic political complexity included sophisticated record-keeping practices that tracked tribute obligations, military service, and ceremonial responsibilities throughout royal territories. Hieroglyphic texts from sites like Naranjo and Caracol contain detailed accounts of tribute payments, including specific quantities of cacao, cotton textiles, jade ornaments, and exotic feathers that subordinate communities were required to provide at regular intervals. These records indicate that Maya administrators developed standardized systems for measuring and recording economic transactions that facilitated long-distance trade and political control. The military organization that enforced political authority during the late Classic period involved professional warrior classes supported by tribute obligations and specialized training institutions. Elite warriors known as Holkan underwent extensive training in weapons handling, tactical formations, and ceremonial protocols that prepared them for both battlefield combat and ritual performances. Archaeological evidence from sites like Dos Pilas indicates that these warrior elites maintained arsenals containing thousands of obsidian-tipped spears, atlatl darts, and composite bows capable of penetrating the cotton armour worn by enemy fighters. The astronomical achievements of late classic Maya civilization reached unprecedented levels of precision and sophistication, with court astronomers developing observational techniques and mathematical methods that enabled accurate predictions of celestial events over multi-century periods. The Karakol Astronomical Observatory, constructed during the 7th century, contained viewing chambers aligned with extreme positions of Venus, the Moon, and various star groups that allowed astronomers to track celestial cycles with remarkable accuracy. The building's interior passages and windows were positioned to frame specific celestial events, creating a three-dimensional astronomical instrument that functioned as both observatory and calendar computer. Maya astronomers during this period developed mathematical techniques for calculating planetary positions, eclipse cycles, and seasonal variations that required sophisticated understanding of geometric relationships and algebraic methods. The Dresden Codex preserves tables tracking Venus synodic periods with accuracy that differs from modern calculations by less than 7 minutes over 500-year cycles, demonstrating observational precision that required systematic data collection spanning multiple generations of astronomers. These calculations supported both religious activities and practical applications, including agricultural planning, military timing, and architectural orientation. The long count calendar system achieved its most sophisticated expression during the late Classic period, with inscriptions recording dates spanning over 5,000 years from the mythological creation event to projected future dates. Maya chronologists developed methods for converting between different calendrical systems, calculating elapsed time intervals, and projecting dates into the distant future that required mastery of complex mathematical operations involving large numbers and multiple variables. The calendar round, combining 260-day and 365-day cycles, was supplemented by longer cycles including the 7 200-day Katun and the 144 000-day Baktun that enabled precise dating of historical events and mythological narratives. The mathematical innovations that supported these astronomical achievements included positional notation systems using base 20 arithmetic, sophisticated methods for handling fractions and remainders, and algebraic techniques for solving problems involving multiple unknowns. Maya mathematicians developed the concept of zero as both a placeholder and a number in its own right, enabling calculations that would have been impossible with other ancient mathematical systems. These mathematical advances supported not only astronomical work but also architectural planning, engineering calculations, and commercial transactions that required precise quantitative analysis. The trade networks that connected late Classic Maya centers with distant regions throughout Mesoamerica and beyond achieved unprecedented scale and complexity. Obsidian from sources in highland Guatemala and central Mexico appears at lowland sites in quantities indicating regular commercial relationships spanning over 1,000 kilometers. Chemical analysis of obsidian artifacts has identified specific volcanic sources and revealed trade routes that connected Maya centers with suppliers in regions as distant as central Mexico and El Salvador. The standardization of obsidian tool forms across vast geographic areas suggests the existence of specialized trading communities that maintain quality control and distribution networks spanning multiple political territories. Jade working reached extraordinary levels of technical sophistication during the late Classic period, with Maya craftsmen developing techniques for soaring, drilling and polishing this extremely hard stone using tools made from even harder materials. The jade workshops at Cancun in Guatemala produced ornaments and ceremonial objects that were distributed throughout the Maya region and beyond, with finished pieces appearing in elite burials from Yucatan to Honduras. The technical expertise required for this work included knowledge of jade's crystalline structure, methods for preventing fractures during cutting, and polishing techniques that created mirror-like surfaces on finished pieces. The cacao trade emerged as one of the most important economic activities of the late Classic period, with Maya merchants establishing commercial networks that extended from the Pacific coast of Chiapas to the Caribbean shores of Belize. Cacao beans served as both luxury commodity and standardized currency, with hieroglyphic texts recording their use in tribute payments, commercial transactions, and ritual offerings. The Chontalpa region of Tabasco became a major cacao-producing area, with archaeological evidence indicating large-scale cultivation using sophisticated irrigation systems and processing facilities that produced chocolate beverages for elite consumption throughout Mesoamerica. The production and distribution of cotton textiles represented another major component of late Classic trade networks. Maya weavers developed techniques for creating complex patterns using multiple colors and specialized weaving methods that produced textiles rivaling those produced anywhere in the contemporary world. The tropical climate of the Maya region has prevented preservation of most organic materials, but impressions on ceramic vessels and stone sculptures indicate that Maya textiles incorporated intricate geometric designs, figurative representations, and symbolic motifs that conveyed information about the wearer's social status, political affiliations, and religious beliefs. Marine shell working became increasingly specialized during the late Classic period, with craftsmen developing techniques for creating elaborate ornaments from both Pacific and Caribbean species. The workshops at Cancun produced shell ornaments that were traded throughout the Maya region, with finished pieces appearing in elite burials hundreds of kilometers from their production centers. The technical expertise required for this work included knowledge of different shell species, methods for cutting and shaping shells without breakage, and techniques for creating complex three-dimensional forms through careful removal of material. The exchange of exotic feathers from tropical birds created trade relationships that extended Maya commercial networks into the Amazon basin and other distant regions. Quetzal feathers from highland Guatemala were particularly prized for their brilliant green coloration and symbolic associations with divine kingship. Maya traders established relationships with highland communities that specialized in capturing and processing these birds, creating supply chains that delivered finished feather products to lowland courts, where they were incorporated into royal regalia and ceremonial costumes. The ceramic traditions of the late Classic period achieved unprecedented artistic sophistication through the development of polychrome painting techniques that created narrative scenes of remarkable complexity and beauty. The so-called codex-style ceramics featured painted scenes depicting mythological narratives, court ceremonies, and supernatural beings rendered with artistic skill that rivals contemporary manuscript illumination in other world civilizations. These vessels required coordination between potters who created the ceramic forms and specialized painters who executed the decorative programs, indicating sophisticated workshop organization and artistic training systems. The iconographic programs decorating late Classic ceramics incorporated multiple levels of meaning that required extensive knowledge of Maya mythology, religious symbolism, and historical traditions. Scenes depicting the hero twins' adventures in the underworld incorporated astronomical references, calendrical calculations, and genealogical information that connected mythological narratives with contemporary political events. The complexity of these artistic programs indicates that Maya painters worked within sophisticated intellectual traditions that integrated multiple knowledge systems into coherent visual narratives. The collapse of southern lowland Maya civilization during the 9th and 10th centuries represents one of archaeology's most intensively studied, yet still debated phenomena. What began as isolated signs of stress in peripheral centres around 800 CE cascaded into a comprehensive systemic failure that saw the abandonment of cities that had flourished for over 6 centuries. The complexity of this collapse defies simple explanations, involving the intersection of environmental degradation, political instability, warfare intensification, and climatic shifts that created a perfect storm of challenges overwhelming even the most sophisticated Maya adaptive strategies. Environmental degradation reached critical levels throughout the central Peton region during the late 8th and early 9th centuries, as centuries of intensive agriculture and deforestation created ecological conditions that could no longer support the massive populations concentrated around major centres. Paleoecological studies from lake sediments in the Mirador Calakmul region reveal dramatic increases in erosion indicators during this period, with siltation rates in major watersheds increasing by 400% compared to earlier levels. The extensive deforestation required to support urban populations and provide construction materials for monumental architecture had stripped protective forest cover from vast areas, leaving exposed soils vulnerable to the intense tropical rains that characterize the region's wet season. The raised-field agricultural systems that had supported late classic population densities began failing as sediment loads from eroded hillsides clogged the intricate canal networks that regulated water flow and maintained soil fertility. Archaeological investigations at Pull Trouser Swamp and other wetland areas show clear evidence of canal abandonment during the 9th century, with waterways becoming choked with sediment and debris that rendered them unusable for transportation and irrigation. The labour requirements for maintaining these systems had become prohibitive as populations declined and political authority fragmented, creating a feedback loop where agricultural productivity decreased precisely when demographic pressures demanded increased food production. Soil exhaustion in the extensively terraced hillside systems around major centres compounded the agricultural crisis. Chemical analysis of terra soils from sites like Karakol indicates severe depletion of essential nutrients including nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium by the late 8th century. The terra preta artificial soils that had maintained productivity for centuries showed signs of degradation as organic matter inputs decreased and intensive cultivation without adequate fallow periods depleted soil microorganisms essential for nutrient cycling. The sophisticated soil management techniques that had sustained Maya agriculture for over a millennium proved inadequate when applied at the massive scale required by late classic population densities. Water management systems throughout the region experienced catastrophic failures as the hydrological cycle became increasingly disrupted by deforestation and climate change. The elaborate reservoir systems at Tikal, which had provided reliable water supplies for over 500 years, began experiencing severe siltation problems that reduced storage capacity precisely when extended dry seasons demanded greater water conservation. Sediment cores from these reservoirs show dramatic increases in clay and organic matter deposition during the 9th century, indicating that the watersheds feeding these systems had become severely degraded through erosion and vegetation loss. Climate change during the Terminal Classic period created additional stresses that pushed already vulnerable agricultural systems beyond their breaking points. Paleoclimatic reconstructions based on speleothem records from caves throughout the Yucatan Peninsula indicate that the region experienced a series of severe droughts between 820 and 870 CE, with some dry periods lasting up to 20 years. These extended droughts were more severe than any experienced during the previous millennium, creating conditions that overwhelmed even the sophisticated water management systems that had enabled Maya civilization to thrive in a challenging tropical environment. The drought conditions were particularly devastating because they coincided with the period of maximum population density and environmental degradation. Lake-level reconstructions from multiple sites throughout the Maya lowlands show water levels dropping to unprecedented lows during the mid-9th century, with some seasonal water sources disappearing entirely for extended periods. The timing of these droughts, occurring during the peak of the agricultural growing season, created cascading failures throughout the food production system as crops failed and stored reserves became exhausted. Temperature fluctuations during this period added another layer of stress to agricultural systems already struggling with drought and soil degradation. Paleoclimatic data indicates that the region experienced significant temperature variations, with some periods of cooling that shortened growing seasons and reduced the productivity of tropical crops. These temperature changes disrupted the carefully calibrated agricultural calendars that Maya farmers had developed over centuries, making it difficult to predict optimal planting and harvesting times for different crops. Warfare intensified dramatically during the Terminal Classic period, as competing polities struggled for control over diminishing resources and agricultural territories. The traditional Maya pattern of ritualized conflict designed to capture prisoners and demonstrate royal power evolved into increasingly destructive campaigns aimed at territorial conquest and resource extraction. Archaeological evidence from sites throughout the central Payton shows extensive fortification construction during the 9th century, with defensive walls, moats and palisades appearing at centres that had never required such protection during earlier periods. The siege of Dos Pilas around 830 CE exemplifies the destructive nature of terminal classic warfare. Archaeological excavations have revealed that the site's inhabitants dismantled their own ceremonial architecture to construct defensive walls around the urban core, using carved stelae and temple stones as building materials in a desperate attempt to create fortifications capable of withstanding extended siege warfare. The discovery of mass burials containing individuals who died from violence, combined with evidence of burning and deliberate destruction throughout the site, indicates that these defensive measures ultimately proved inadequate against the sustained military pressure applied by enemy forces. Similar patterns of fortification and destruction appear at sites throughout the region during this period. At Aguateca, another major centre in the Petexbatun region, archaeologists have uncovered evidence of a violent conquest that occurred around 830 CE, with buildings burned while still occupied and valuable objects abandoned in place as residents fled the advancing enemy forces. The preservation of household assemblages in their original contexts provides unprecedented insights into the daily lives of Maya elites during the final decades of classic period civilization, revealing the material wealth and sophisticated craftsmanship that characterized these communities even as they faced existential threats. The political instability that accompanied intensified warfare created conditions where traditional mechanisms for conflict resolution and diplomatic negotiation became ineffective. The elaborate alliance systems that had maintained relative stability during the late Classic period collapsed as rulers prioritized short-term survival over long-term political relationships. Hieroglyphic inscriptions from this period record frequent changes in political allegiance, with subordinate centres switching loyalty between competing overlords as military fortunes shifted and territorial boundaries became increasingly fluid. The breakdown of interregional trade networks during the Terminal Classic period disrupted economic relationships that had sustained Maya civilization for centuries. Archaeological evidence shows dramatic decreases in the quantities of imported goods appearing at lowland sites during the 9th century, with obsidian imports from highland Guatemala declining by over 80% compared to late Classic levels. The standardized production techniques and quality control measures that had characterized Classic period craft industries gave way to increasingly localized production using inferior materials and simplified manufacturing processes. The collapse of long-distance trade relationships had particularly severe impacts on communities that had specialized in producing goods for export to distant markets. The jade workshops at Kunkuan, which had supplied finished ornaments throughout the Maya region during the late Classic period, show clear evidence of production decline and eventual abandonment during the 9th century. Similar patterns appear at other specialized production centers, indicating that the economic integration that had characterized Classic Maya civilization was breaking down as political instability and warfare disrupted commercial relationships. Cacao production, which had been one of the most important components of Maya trade networks, experienced severe disruptions as the regions that specialized in cultivation became battlegrounds between competing polities. Archaeological surveys in the Chontalpa region of Tabasco show widespread site abandonment during the 9th century, with cacao processing facilities and associated residential areas left vacant as populations fled the violence and instability that characterized the Terminal Classic period. The loss of cacao supplies disrupted not only commercial relationships, but also the religious and ceremonial activities that depended on chocolate beverages for ritual purposes. The abandonment of major urban centres proceeded gradually during the 9th and early 10th centuries, with different sites experiencing population decline and eventual desertion at varying rates depending on their specific circumstances and adaptive capacities. Tikal, despite its size and political importance, shows clear evidence of demographic decline beginning around 830 CE, with the cessation of new construction projects and the gradual abandonment of residential areas, starting from the periphery and moving toward the ceremonial core. The last dated monument at the site was erected in 869 CE, marking the end of over 6 centuries of continuous dynastic rule and monumental construction. The archaeological evidence for Tikal's abandonment includes the gradual accumulation of debris in formerly maintained plazas and causeways, indicating that the labour forces responsible for urban maintenance had either departed or been redirected to more pressing survival needs. Residential excavations show that many elite compounds were abandoned with valuable objects left in place, suggesting that departures were often hasty and unplanned, rather than gradual relocations to alternative locations. The ceramic assemblages from the final occupation phases show declining quality and increasing reliance on locally produced vessels, rather than the elaborate polychrome ceramics that had characterized elite material culture during the late Classic period. Palenque experienced a similar pattern of gradual decline and eventual abandonment, though the process appears to have been somewhat more extended than at other major centers. The site's last dated inscription was carved in 799 CE, but archaeological evidence indicates that significant populations continued to occupy the center for several decades after the cessation of monumental construction and hieroglyphic record-keeping. The palace complex shows evidence of continued occupation and modification during the early 9th century, with new construction using recycled materials from earlier buildings and simplified architectural techniques that required less specialized labor and technical expertise. The abandonment of Palenque's elaborate water management systems provides clear evidence of the site's declining population and administrative capacity. the sophisticated hydraulic installations that had supplied fresh water to the urban core and created decorative fountain displays in palace courtyards gradually fell into disrepair as the technical specialists responsible for their maintenance departed or died without training successors. Sediment accumulation in the main aqueducts indicates that cleaning and maintenance ceased around 850 CE, leading to system failures that made continued urban occupation increasingly difficult. Calakmul, despite its massive size and political importance during the late Classic period, experienced one of the most dramatic population collapses of any major Maya centre. Archaeological surveys indicate that the site's population declined by over 90% between 800 and 900 CE, with vast residential areas becoming completely depopulated within a few decades. The speed of this demographic collapse suggests that it resulted from a combination of factors including military defeat, environmental degradation, and the breakdown of the tribute systems that had supported the site's large non-agricultural population. The final phases of occupation at Calakmul show clear evidence of social breakdown and the collapse of traditional authority structures. Elite residences that had been carefully maintained for centuries were abandoned or occupied by squatters who left evidence of activities inconsistent with their original functions. Ceremonial areas show signs of deliberate vandalism, with carved monuments defaced and ritual deposits disturbed in ways that suggest the breakdown of the religious and political systems that had maintained social order during the Classic period. Copan's abandonment followed a different pattern, with the site's population declining more gradually over several decades, rather than experiencing the rapid collapse seen at centres in the central Peton. The site's last major construction project, the completion of the hieroglyphic stairway around 755 CE, was followed by a period of reduced building activity and political instability that culminated in the violent death of the ruler 18 Rabbit in 738 CE. Archaeological evidence indicates that the site continued to function as a regional centre for several more decades, but with greatly reduced population and political authority. The final occupation phases at Copan show evidence of significant cultural changes as traditional elite practices were abandoned or modified to accommodate changing circumstances. The elaborate ball court rituals that had been central to royal ceremonial life ceased to be performed, and the court complex was gradually abandoned as the institutions it had housed became defunct. Residential areas show evidence of increasing social stratification as elite compounds were subdivided and occupied by multiple families, suggesting the breakdown of traditional household organization and kinship systems. The northward migration of Maya populations during the terminal Classic period represented not simply a geographic relocation, but a fundamental transformation in Maya cultural and political organization. The Yucatan Peninsula, with its different environmental conditions and existing population centers, offered opportunities for cultural continuity, while also requiring significant adaptations to new circumstances. The cenotes and underground river systems of northern Yucatan provided reliable water sources that were less vulnerable to the drought conditions that had devastated southern lowland agriculture, while the region's different soil conditions and topography required modifications to traditional farming techniques. Chichen Itza emerged as the most important center in northern Yucatan during this transition period, incorporating refugees and cultural traditions from the collapsing southern centers while developing new forms of political organization and architectural expression. The site's Great Ball Court, the largest in Mesoamerica, reflects the continuing importance of traditional Maya ceremonial activities, while also showing influences from central Mexican cultures that were becoming increasingly important in post-Classic period politics. The architectural fusion evident at Chichen Itza combining traditional Maya construction techniques with Toltec-influenced design elements, exemplifies the cultural transformations that characterized this transition period. The political systems that emerged in northern Yucatan during the terminal Classic and early post-Classic periods differed significantly from the divine kingship that had characterized southern lowland centers. Archaeological evidence suggests that Chichen Itza and other northern centers were governed by councils of nobles rather than individual rulers, representing a fundamental shift in Maya political organization that may have developed in response to the failures of centralized authority during the collapse period. This new form of governance appears to have been more flexible and resilient than traditional divine kingship, enabling northern centers to maintain political stability while southern cities experienced complete systemic failure. The cultural continuity evident in northern Yucatan during this transition period demonstrates the resilience of Maya intellectual and religious traditions despite the catastrophic changes affecting political and economic systems. Astronomical knowledge and calendrical systems continued to function at northern centers, with inscriptions at Chichen Itza and other sites maintaining the long count dating system and recording celestial observations with the same precision that had characterized classic period astronomy. The persistence of these intellectual traditions provided cultural continuity that helped maintain Maya identity during a period of unprecedented social and political transformation. The transformation of Maya civilization following the southern lowland collapse manifested most dramatically in the rise of Chichen Itza as the preeminent power in northern Yucatan. Unlike the gradual abandonment that characterized terminal classic centers in the Petén, Chichen Itza experienced explosive growth during the 10th and 11th centuries, absorbing populations, cultural traditions, and political refugees from the collapsing southern cities while simultaneously developing new forms of governance and architectural expression that would define post-classic Maya civilization. The site's strategic location near the Stoloc cenote provided the reliable water source essential for supporting large populations in the seasonally arid northern Yucatan environment. This natural well, over 60 meters in diameter and extending 20 meters below ground level, supplied fresh water year-round and became the focal point for religious activities that attracted pilgrims from throughout Mesoamerica. The cenote's significance extended beyond mere water supply, as Maya religious traditions associated these natural formations with entrances to the underworld and dwelling places of Chark, the rain god whose favour was essential for agricultural success in this drought-prone region. Chichen Itza's architectural program during its florescence period represents a remarkable fusion of traditional Maya construction techniques with design elements derived from central Mexican cultures, particularly the Toltecs of Tula in the Valley of Mexico. The Kukulkan Pyramid, rising 24 meters above the Great Plaza, demonstrates this architectural synthesis through its stepped profile and feathered serpent iconography that clearly reflects Toltec influence, while maintaining the fundamental Maya preference for astronomical alignments and mathematical precision in construction. The pyramid's 4 stairways each contain 91 steps, which combined with the shared top platform create a total of 365 steps corresponding to the solar year, demonstrating the continued importance of calendrical symbolism in Maya architectural planning. The engineering precision evident in the Kukulkan pyramid's construction required sophisticated mathematical calculations and surveying techniques. Each side of the structure measures exactly 55.3 meters at the base, with corners aligned to the cardinal directions within a margin of error of less than 1 degree. The pyramid's interior contains an earlier structure featuring a red jaguar throne with jade inlay eyes and obsidian spots, indicating that the visible pyramid represents a later construction phase that deliberately preserved and incorporated earlier architectural elements. This building sequence reflects the Maya practice of architectural renewal while maintaining connections to ancestral traditions and sacred geography. The Great Bull Court at Chichen Itza, measuring 168 meters in length and 70 meters in width, represents the largest bull court constructed anywhere in Mesoamerica and demonstrates the continuing centrality of this ritual sport in post-classic Maya society. The court's acoustic properties create remarkable sound effects, with whispers at one end clearly audible at the opposite goal, while handclaps produce echoes that resemble the call of the Quetzal bird sacred to Maya religious traditions. These acoustic phenomena were clearly intentional design features that enhanced the ceremonial significance of bull game rituals and demonstrated the sophisticated understanding of architectural acoustics possessed by Maya engineers. The sculptural program decorating the bull court walls depicts scenes of human sacrifice associated with the bull game, showing players being decapitated with streams of blood transformed into serpents and flowering vines. These relief carvings, executed in the distinctive Chichen Itza style that combines Maya narrative traditions with Toltec artistic conventions, illustrate the increasing emphasis on human sacrifice that characterized post-classic period religious practices. The iconographic program includes representations of Kukulkan, the feathered serpent deity whose cult became central to Chichen Itza's religious and political identity during this period. The Temple of Warriors complex adjacent to the Great Plaza demonstrates the military emphasis that distinguished post-classic Maya political culture from earlier periods. The structure's colonnaded halls could accommodate large assemblies of warriors and nobles, while the sculptural decorations emphasize martial themes, including representations of Toltec warriors, captive enemies, and military regalia. The temple summit contains a Calakmul sculpture, a reclining figure with a receptacle on its chest for receiving sacrificial offerings, representing another clear example of central Mexican influence on Maya religious practices. The architectural innovations at Chichen Itza included the extensive use of columns to create large interior spaces impossible to achieve with traditional Maya corbel vaulting techniques. The group of 1,000 columns demonstrates this new construction method, with rows of cylindrical stone columns supporting flat roofs that covered areas exceeding 1,000 square meters. These architectural spaces served administrative and commercial functions that reflected the increasingly complex economic activities centered at Chichen Itza during its period of regional dominance. The political transformations that accompanied Chichen Itza's rise involved fundamental changes in Maya governance systems that departed significantly from the divine kingship model that had characterized classic period city-states. Archaeological and epigraphic evidence suggests that Chichen Itza was governed by a council of nobles rather than a single hereditary ruler, representing a shift toward more collective decision-making processes that may have developed in response to the failures of centralized authority during the terminal classic collapse. This new political model, termed multipal or joint rule in Maya sources, distributed power among multiple leaders who represented different lineages, military orders, or regional constituencies. The absence of individual ruler portraits and dynastic monuments at Chichen Itza contrasts sharply with classic period centers where royal propaganda dominated artistic programs. Instead, the site's sculptural decorations emphasize collective activities including military campaigns, religious ceremonies, and tribute presentations that involved multiple participants rather than focusing on individual rulers. This artistic emphasis on group activities reflects the collaborative political structures that governed post-classic Maya society and distinguished it from earlier periods of Maya civilization. The integration of central Mexican cultural elements at Chichen Itza extended beyond architectural and artistic influences to include religious practices, military organization, and commercial activities that connected northern Yucatan with broader Mesoamerican cultural networks. The cult of Kukulkan, the Maya version of the central Mexican deity Quetzalcoatl, became central to Chichen Itza's religious identity and provided ideological justification for the site's political expansion throughout the northern Maya region. This deity's association with wind, rain, and fertility made it particularly relevant to agricultural communities in the drought-prone Yucatan Peninsula. The warrior societies that played prominent roles in Chichen Itza's political organization showed clear influences from central Mexican military traditions, including the eagle and jaguar orders that had been important in Toltec society. Archaeological evidence from the site includes representations of these warrior groups in sculptural programs and ceramic decorations, indicating that Maya military organization had adopted organizational structures and symbolic systems derived from central Mexican cultures. These military societies served both defensive and offensive functions, protecting Chichen Itza's territory, while also conducting campaigns that extended the site's political influence throughout northern Yucatan. The development of maritime trade routes around the Yucatan Peninsula during the post-classic period created new economic opportunities that fundamentally altered Maya commercial systems and political relationships. The coastal geography of Yucatan, with its numerous bays, lagoons, and offshore islands, provided ideal conditions for canoe-based transportation that could move bulk goods more efficiently than overland portage through dense tropical forests. Maya merchants developed large trading canoes capable of carrying several tons of cargo and navigating the challenging waters around the peninsula's northern and eastern coasts. Archaeological investigations at coastal sites including Santa Rita Corozal, Tanca, and Tulum have revealed evidence of specialized port facilities designed to support maritime commerce. These installations included stone piers, warehouse structures, and residential areas for merchant communities that facilitated the exchange of goods between highland producers and lowland consumers. The strategic location of these ports enabled Maya traders to establish commercial relationships with central Mexican merchants while maintaining traditional connections with highland Guatemala and the Pacific coast regions. The goods transported through these maritime networks included bulk commodities that had been difficult to move efficiently through overland trade routes during the Classic period. Salt production along the northern Yucatan coast became a major industry during the post-Classic period, with extensive evaporation ponds and processing facilities supplying this essential commodity to communities throughout Mesoamerica. The Sampu salt works near modern Celestun could produce thousands of tons of salt annually, creating wealth that supported the political expansion of northern Yucatan centers and provided resources for monumental construction projects. Honey and beeswax emerged as important export commodities that connected Maya producers with distant markets throughout Mesoamerica. The tropical forests of Yucatan provided ideal conditions for native stingless bees whose honey was prized for both culinary and ritual purposes, while their wax served essential functions in metallurgy and artistic production. Maya beekeepers developed sophisticated hive management techniques that increased honey production while maintaining sustainable harvesting practices that preserved wild bee populations. Cotton cultivation and textile production expanded dramatically in northern Yucatan during the post-Classic period, taking advantage of the region's climate and soil conditions that favored this crop. Archaeological evidence from sites including Mayapan and Chichen Itza indicates large-scale cotton processing facilities with spindle whirls, loom weights, and dye preparation areas that supported textile production on an industrial scale. Maya weavers developed techniques for creating elaborate textiles with complex patterns and multiple colours that were highly valued in long-distance trade networks. The cacao trade, which had been disrupted by the terminal classic collapse in traditional producing regions, was reorganized during the post-classic period through new supply networks that connected Maya merchants with producers in previously peripheral areas. The Chontalpa region of Tabasco recovered from its 9th century abandonment and became a major cacao supplier for post-classic trade networks, while new production areas were developed in Soconusco and other Pacific coast regions. Maya merchants established trading posts and commercial relationships that ensured reliable supplies of cacao beans for both consumption and use as currency in commercial transactions. The emergence of Mayapan as a major political centre during the 12th century represented another significant development in post-classic Maya political organisation. Located in the heart of the northern Yucatan Peninsula, Mayapan grew from a relatively minor settlement to become the dominant power in the region following Chichen Itza's decline around 1200 CE. The site's defensive walls, enclosing an area of over 4 square kilometres, indicate that military considerations played important roles in its urban planning and political development. Mayapan's political organisation represented a further evolution of the multiple system that had emerged at Chichen Itza, with power distributed among multiple noble lineages who maintained residences within the walled urban core while controlling territories throughout the northern peninsula. Archaeological excavations have identified over 20 elite residential compounds within Mayapan's walls, each containing multiple structures arranged around private courtyards and associated with specific lineages or political factions. This residential pattern reflects the confederated political structure that governed the site and distinguished it from earlier Maya urban centres. The architectural traditions at Mayapan showed clear continuities with Chichen Itza, while also incorporating new design elements that reflected changing political and religious priorities. The Kukulkan Pyramid at Mayapan, though smaller than its Chichen Itza counterpart, maintained the same basic proportions and astronomical alignments while incorporating local variations in construction techniques and decorative programs. The site's numerous small temples and shrines indicate that religious activities were more decentralized than at earlier centers, possibly reflecting the distributed political authority that characterized Mayapan's governance system. The formation of political confederations during the post-classic period represented a fundamental departure from the city-state model that had dominated Maya political organization during the classic period. These confederations, known as Kuchkabal in Maya sources, typically included a dominant center surrounded by subordinate communities that maintained varying degrees of autonomy while acknowledging the authority of the confederation's leadership. This political model proved more flexible and resilient than earlier centralized systems, enabling Maya communities to maintain political cohesion while adapting to changing economic and environmental conditions. The Quechua Confederation in east-central Yucatan exemplifies this new political model, with archaeological surveys identifying over 50 sites connected through formal political relationships that persisted for several centuries. The Confederation's capital at Ixmal coordinated military activities, tribute collection, and ceremonial obligations among member communities while allowing local leaders to maintain authority over internal affairs. This political arrangement enabled efficient resource mobilization for large-scale projects while preserving local traditions and reducing the risks associated with over-centralization. Religious practices during the post-classic period showed both continuities with classic Maya traditions and significant innovations that reflected changing political circumstances and cultural influences. The continued importance of astronomical observation and calendrical calculation is evidenced by the survival of complex ceremonial cycles and the construction of new observatories at sites including Mayapan and coastal centres. However, the increasing emphasis on human sacrifice and militaristic religious symbolism distinguished post-classic practices from earlier periods and reflected the growing influence of central Mexican religious traditions. The sacred cenote at Chichen Itza became one of the most important pilgrimage destinations in Mesoamerica during this period, attracting visitors from throughout the Maya region and beyond who came to make offerings to the rain god Chark. Archaeological investigations of the cenote have recovered thousands of artifacts including gold ornaments, jade objects, copal incense, and human remains that demonstrate the site's pan-regional religious significance. The offerings span several centuries and include objects from regions as distant as Panama and the American Southwest, indicating the extensive networks that connected Chichen Itza with distant cultural areas. The artistic traditions that developed during the post-classic period combined traditional Maya techniques with new stylistic influences that reflected the period's cultural diversity and commercial connections. Mural paintings at sites including Santa Rita Corozal and Tulum show clear influences from central Mexican artistic traditions, while maintaining distinctively Maya iconographic elements and narrative structures. These paintings often depicted historical events, religious ceremonies, and mythological narratives that served both decorative and educational functions within their architectural contexts. Ceramic production during the post-classic period showed increasing standardization and specialization as potters developed new techniques for mass production while maintaining quality standards for elite consumption. The Silo fine orange ceramic tradition that emerged during this period featured distinctive paste compositions and surface treatments that required specialized technical knowledge and access to specific raw materials. These ceramics were distributed throughout the Maya region and beyond, indicating the existence of specialized production centers and long-distance distribution networks that connected producers with distant consumers. The decline of Chichen Itza around 1200 CE marked the beginning of a new phase in Maya political organization, characterized by increasing fragmentation and the rise of competing regional powers. Unlike the catastrophic collapse that had devastated the southern lowlands 3 centuries earlier, this transition occurred gradually as Chichen Itza's influence waned and other centers emerged to fill the resulting power vacuum. Archaeological evidence suggests that internal conflicts, possibly related to succession disputes or factional competition within the multiple governing system, contributed to the site's political decline, even as it remained an important religious center attracting pilgrims from throughout Mesoamerica. Mayapan's ascendancy during the 13th century represented the most successful attempt to establish centralized authority in northern Yucatan following Chichen Itza's decline. The site's rulers, claiming legitimacy through connections to earlier Itza dynasties, constructed a walled city that served as both administrative center and symbolic representation of their political authority. The massive defensive walls, built from carefully fitted limestone blocks and extending over 9 kilometers in circumference, enclosed not only ceremonial and administrative structures, but also residential areas for noble families whose presence at the capital ensured their loyalty while serving as hostages against rebellion in their home territories. Within Mayapan's walls, archaeological excavations have revealed a complex urban landscape containing over 4,000 structures, ranging from modest residential platforms to elaborate multi-story palaces. The site's central ceremonial precinct featured a scaled-down replica of Chichen Itza's Kukulkan pyramid, measuring 15 meters in height and maintaining the same basic proportions and astronomical alignments as its prototype. This architectural quotation served both practical and symbolic functions, providing a venue for traditional ceremonies while asserting Mayapan's claim to inherit Chichen Itza's political and religious authority. The residential compounds within Mayapan's walls housed representatives of noble lineages from throughout northern Yucatan, creating a unique urban environment where traditional Maya settlement patterns were modified to accommodate the political requirements of Confederation governance. Each compound typically contained multiple structures arranged around private courtyards, with architectural elaboration and artifact assemblages clearly indicating the social status and regional affiliations of their occupants. The largest compounds, covering areas exceeding 2,000 square meters, belonged to the most powerful lineages and included specialized structures for administrative activities, craft production, and religious observances. Mayapan's political system, known through both archaeological evidence and ethno-historic sources, represented a sophisticated adaptation of traditional Maya governance to the challenges of managing a large territorial confederation. The Kokam lineage held paramount authority as the Confederation's ruling family, but power was shared with representatives of subordinate lineages through a council system that provided mechanisms for collective decision-making while maintaining hierarchical authority structures. This political arrangement enabled Mayapan to control territory extending throughout northern and western Yucatan, while accommodating the autonomy expectations of local noble families. The tribute systems that supported Mayapan's political authority involved complex networks of obligation and exchange that connected the capital with subordinate communities throughout its territory. Archaeological evidence from sites including Telchac, Zibilchaltun, and Ake indicates that these communities provided regular tribute payments, including cotton textiles, salt, honey, and cacao, while receiving manufactured goods, exotic materials, and political protection in return. The standardization of certain artifact types across Mayapan's territory suggests centralized control over craft production and distribution networks that supported the Confederation's economic integration. Maritime commerce continued expanding during Mayapan's florescence, with coastal trading centers serving as intermediaries between highland producers and lowland consumers throughout Mesoamerica. The port facilities at Isla Cerritos, connected to Chichen Itza through a 100-kilometer causeway system, maintained their importance as transshipment points for goods moving between the Gulf of Mexico and Caribbean trade networks. Archaeological investigations at the site have revealed warehouse structures, residential areas for merchant communities, and specialized facilities for processing and repackaging goods for distribution to inland consumers. The development of new coastal trading centers during this period reflected the increasing importance of maritime commerce in Maya economic systems. Santa Rita Corozal, located near the mouth of the New River in modern Belize, emerged as a major port serving communities throughout the southern Maya lowlands. The site's strategic location provided access to both riverine transportation networks extending into the Petén region and coastal routes connecting Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico trade circuits. Excavations have uncovered evidence of specialized craft production, including metalworking, shell carving, and ceramic manufacture that supplied goods for both local consumption and long-distance trade. Tulum's spectacular clifftop location on the Caribbean coast of Quintana Roo made it one of the most important ports in the Eastern Maya region during the late post-classic period. The site's defensive walls, constructed from precisely fitted limestone blocks, enclosed an area of approximately 6 hectares containing residential structures, administrative buildings, and temples that served both local populations and visiting merchants. The Temple of the Frescoes at Tulum contains some of the finest examples of late post-classic mural painting, with scenes depicting deities, astronomical phenomena, and ritual activities executed in brilliant blues, reds, and yellows that have retained their intensity for over 500 years. The iconographic program of Tulum's murals demonstrates the continuing vitality of Maya artistic traditions, while also showing influences from Central Mexican cultures that reflected the site's participation in pan-Mesoamerican trade networks. Representations of the diving god, possibly associated with Venus or beekeeping activities, appear alongside traditional Maya deities including Itzamna and Chark in compositions that combine mythological narratives with astronomical observations. The technical quality of these paintings, executed on lime plaster surfaces using mineral-based pigments, indicates that Maya artists had maintained the sophisticated techniques developed during the Classic period while adapting their iconographic vocabularies to reflect changing religious and political circumstances. The fragmentation of political authority that characterized the late post-Classic period created opportunities for smaller centers to achieve regional prominence through specialized economic activities or strategic geographic locations. Lamanai, situated along the New River in northern Belize, experienced a remarkable revival during this period after centuries of reduced occupation following the terminal Classic collapse. The site's location provided access to both riverine and coastal transportation networks, enabling its inhabitants to participate in long-distance trade while serving as intermediaries between highland and lowland economic zones. Archaeological excavations at Lamanai have revealed extensive evidence of metalworking activities during the late post-Classic period, with copper and gold objects produced using techniques that combine traditional Maya craftsmanship with innovations derived from Central Mexican and South American traditions. The site's workshops produced both utilitarian items, including fish hooks, needles and cutting tools, and ceremonial objects including bells, ornaments, and ritual vessels that were distributed throughout the Maya region. The technical expertise required for this metalworking indicates that Lamanai's craftsmen had access to specialized knowledge and raw materials through trade relationships, extending far beyond the Maya cultural area. The Piton Lakes region experienced significant political reorganization during the late post-Classic period as refugee populations from the abandoned Classic centers established new communities around the permanent water sources provided by Lakes Piton, Itza, Yaxha, and Salpeten. These communities, collectively known as the Itza, maintained many traditional Maya cultural practices while adapting to the environmental and political challenges of their new circumstances. The capital at Tayasal, located on an island in Lake Piton, Itza, became the center of an independent Maya polity that successfully resisted Spanish conquest until 1697, making it the last independent Maya kingdom. The Itza political system combined traditional Maya governance structures with innovations developed in response to their unique geographic and historical circumstances. The island location of Tayasal provided natural defensive advantages that enabled the Itza to maintain independence while surrounding regions fell under Spanish control, but it also created challenges for agricultural production and territorial expansion that required adaptive strategies. Archaeological evidence indicates that the Itza developed intensive agricultural systems around the lake shores while maintaining trading relationships with other Maya communities that provided access to goods and materials unavailable in their immediate territory. The Guatemalan highlands experienced different patterns of political development during the late post-Classic period, with Maya communities adapting to mountainous environments that required different agricultural techniques and settlement strategies than those employed in the lowlands. The Quiche Maya established their capital at Kumakaij in the Western Highlands, constructing a fortified city that controlled trade routes between the Pacific coast and highland valleys. The site's location on a plateau surrounded by deep ravines provided defensive advantages while offering access to obsidian sources, agricultural lands, and trade routes that supported a complex urban society. Kumakai's architectural program reflected both traditional Maya construction techniques and innovations adapted to highland environments and defensive requirements. The site's temples and palaces were constructed using local volcanic stone with techniques that combined Maya architectural traditions with influences from central Mexican cultures. The Great Temple at Kumakaij, rising 20 meters above the surrounding plaza, featured twin staircases and summit shrines that accommodated the dual religious and political functions characteristic of late post-classic Maya ceremonial architecture. The Quiche political system, documented in the Popol Vuh and other ethno-historic sources, involved complex hierarchies of noble lineages competing for political authority while maintaining collective responsibility for territorial defense and resource management. The ruling Kavek lineage held paramount authority, but power was shared with other noble families through council systems that provided mechanisms for collective decision-making and conflict resolution. This political arrangement enabled the Quiche to control territory extending from the Pacific coast to the Central Highlands, while accommodating the autonomy expectations of subordinate communities. The Caciquel Maya, initially subjects of the Quiche Confederation, established their independence during the 15th century and founded their capital at Iximche in the Central Highlands. The site's location provided strategic advantages for controlling trade routes, while offering defensive positions that could be fortified against enemy attacks. Archaeological excavations at Iximche have revealed evidence of rapid urban growth during the late post-classic period, with residential areas, ceremonial precincts, and defensive installations constructed using techniques that combined traditional Maya methods with innovations adapted to highland conditions. The rivalry between Quiche and Caciquel polities created conditions of endemic warfare that characterized highland Maya politics during the late post-classic period. Unlike the ritualized conflicts of earlier periods, these wars involved territorial conquest and resource extraction that fundamentally altered political relationships throughout the region. Archaeological evidence from both Kumakaij and Iximche includes fortification systems, weapon caches, and mass burial sites that demonstrate the destructive nature of these conflicts and their impacts on civilian populations. Economic specialization during the late post-classic period involved the development of regional production centers that supplied goods for both local consumption and long-distance trade. The obsidian workshops at El Chayal in the Guatemalan highlands produced standardized tool forms that were distributed throughout Mesoamerica, with chemical analysis indicating that El Chayal obsidian appears at sites from central Mexico to Honduras. The scale of production at these workshops required sophisticated organization and quality control measures that ensured consistent products while maximizing output efficiency. Salt production along the Caribbean and Gulf coasts became increasingly important during this period as growing populations and expanding trade networks created greater demand for this essential commodity. The salt works at Imal on the northern Yucatan coast employed thousands of workers during the dry season, using evaporation ponds and processing facilities that could produce hundreds of tons of salt annually. The wealth generated by salt production supported the political expansion of northern Yucatan centers, while providing resources for monumental construction and military activities. Cacao cultivation experienced a renaissance during the late post-classic period, as new production areas were developed and traditional growing regions recovered from the disruptions of earlier centuries. The Soconusco region along the Pacific coast of Chiapas became a major cacao supplier, with archaeological evidence indicating intensive cultivation using sophisticated irrigation and terracing systems. The high quality of Soconusco cacao made it particularly valuable in long-distance trade, with beans from this region serving as currency in commercial transactions throughout Mesoamerica. The merchant classes that facilitated these economic activities achieved unprecedented prominence during the late post-classic period, with specialized trading communities maintaining commercial relationships spanning vast geographic areas. Maya merchants known as polum operated large trading canoes capable of carrying several tons of cargo along coastal routes, extending from central Mexico to Honduras. These merchants maintained trading posts at strategic locations throughout their networks, creating infrastructure that supported regular commercial exchanges while providing information about market conditions and political developments in distant regions. The technological innovations that characterized late post-classic Maya culture included both continuations of traditional practices and adaptations to changing circumstances and external influences. Metallurgy, introduced through contact with South American cultures via maritime trade networks, was adapted to Maya aesthetic preferences and functional requirements. Maya metal workers developed techniques for creating copper and gold ornaments that combined traditional iconographic elements with new decorative possibilities offered by metalworking technologies. Ceramic production during this period showed increasing regional variation as local traditions developed distinctive characteristics while maintaining participation in broader cultural networks. The Mayapan redware tradition that emerged in northern Yucatan featured distinctive paste compositions and surface treatments that required specialized technical knowledge and access to specific raw materials. These ceramics were distributed throughout the northern Maya region, indicating the existence of specialized production centers and distribution networks that connected producers with distant consumers. The astronomical knowledge that had characterized classic Maya intellectual achievements continued to flourish during the late post-classic period, with new observatories constructed at sites including Mayapan and Chichen Itza. The Caracol Observatory at Chichen Itza underwent modifications during this period that improved its functionality for tracking celestial phenomena, with new viewing chambers and alignment adjustments that enhanced the precision of astronomical observations. The continued importance of astronomical knowledge is evidenced by the survival of complex ceremonial cycles and the accurate prediction of eclipses and planetary movements recorded in late post-classic sources. Religious practices during this period maintained many traditional elements while incorporating new influences that reflected changing political circumstances and cultural contacts. The cult of Kukulkan remained central to Maya religious life, with ceremonies at Chichen Itza's sacred cenote continuing to attract pilgrims from throughout Mesoamerica. Archaeological investigations of the cenote have recovered artifacts spanning several centuries, including objects from regions as distant as Panama and the American Southwest, that demonstrate the site's continuing pan-regional religious significance. Human sacrifice became increasingly prominent in late post-classic religious practices, with archaeological evidence indicating that these rituals were performed on a larger scale and with greater frequency than during earlier periods. The Tzompantlio skull rack at Chichen Itza, decorated with carved representations of human skulls, provided a permanent display of sacrificial victims that served both religious and political functions. Similar installations at other late post-classic sites indicate that human sacrifice had become a standard component of Maya religious practice, possibly reflecting influences from central Mexican cultures where these rituals were particularly prominent. The resilience demonstrated by Maya communities during the late post-classic period enabled them to maintain cultural continuity while adapting to changing circumstances that included environmental challenges, political fragmentation, and increasing contact with non-Maya cultures. The diversity of adaptive strategies employed by different Maya communities created a mosaic of cultural variation that enriched Maya civilization while providing multiple pathways for cultural survival and development. This resilience would prove crucial as Maya communities faced the unprecedented challenges posed by European contact and colonial domination during the following century. The arrival of Spanish ships along the Caribbean coast of the Yucatan Peninsula in 1517 marked the beginning of a protracted and complex process of conquest that would fundamentally transform Maya society over the following 3 centuries. Unlike the rapid conquests of the Aztec and Inca empires, the Spanish subjugation of Maya territories proceeded slowly and unevenly, encountering fierce resistance from independent Maya polities that had maintained their autonomy for over a millennium. The geographic fragmentation of Maya political authority, which had characterized the late post-classic period, paradoxically both facilitated and hindered Spanish conquest efforts, as the absence of centralized political structures meant that no single decisive victory could secure Spanish control over the entire Maya region. Francisco Hernández de Córdoba's initial expedition in 1517 represented the first sustained European contact with Maya civilization, though earlier voyages may have touched Maya shores without establishing meaningful interactions. Córdoba's 3 ships, carrying approximately 110 men, encountered Maya settlements along the northeastern coast of Yucatan, where they observed substantial stone buildings, evidence of complex social organization, and populations that appeared more sophisticated than the Caribbean island peoples previously contacted by Spanish explorers. The expedition's attempts to establish peaceful relations quickly deteriorated into armed conflicts as Maya warriors, equipped with obsidian-edged weapons, cotton armor, and wooden shields, demonstrated military capabilities that surprised the Spanish with their effectiveness and organization. The Battle of Catoche, fought near the northeastern tip of Yucatan, provided the Spanish with their first direct experience of Maya military tactics and technological capabilities. Maya warriors employed coordinated formations using atlatl dart throwers, composite bows, and obsidian-tipped spears that could penetrate Spanish armor at close range. The Spanish advantages in steel weapons, crossbows, and firearms were partially offset by their unfamiliarity with tropical forest warfare and the Maya defenders' knowledge of local terrain. Córdoba himself suffered severe wounds during the engagement, and the expedition was forced to retreat after losing approximately 20 men while inflicting unknown but apparently significant casualties on the Maya forces. Juan de Grijalva's expedition in 1518 followed the same coastal route with 4 ships and approximately 200 men, seeking to establish more permanent contact with Maya communities while exploring opportunities for trade and territorial acquisition. Grijalva's encounters with Maya settlements revealed the existence of substantial urban centers, sophisticated craft production, and long-distance trade networks that indicated a level of cultural complexity exceeding Spanish expectations based on their Caribbean experiences. The expedition observed large stone pyramids, elaborate sculptures, and evidence of metallurgy that demonstrated Maya technological achievements, while also revealing potential sources of wealth that attracted Spanish interest in further exploration and conquest. The Maya communities encountered by these early expeditions represented diverse political entities with varying attitudes towards Spanish contact. Some coastal settlements, particularly those involved in long-distance trade, showed initial willingness to engage in commercial exchanges and diplomatic negotiations. Maya merchants familiar with foreign traders through their participation in Mesoamerican trade networks possessed frameworks for understanding and interacting with outsiders that facilitated peaceful contact. However, other communities, especially those with strong military traditions or recent experiences of warfare with neighboring Maya polities, responded to Spanish arrival with immediate hostility based on assumptions that the foreigners represented potential enemies seeking territorial conquest. The technological disparities between Spanish and Maya military systems created complex tactical situations that neither side initially understood fully. Spanish steel weapons, crossbows, and early firearms provided significant advantages in direct combat, while horses created psychological effects that could disrupt Maya formations unfamiliar with these animals. However, Maya warriors possessed superior knowledge of local geography, sophisticated understanding of forest warfare tactics, and numerical advantages that could overwhelm small Spanish forces when properly coordinated. The obsidian-edged makuahuitl used by Maya warriors could inflict severe wounds on unarmored opponents, while their cotton armor provided effective protection against many Spanish weapons. Francisco de Montejo the Elder received the first formal commission to conquer Yucatan in 1526, initiating a series of campaigns that would span over 2 decades and involve 3 generations of the Montejo family. The elder Montejo's initial attempts to establish Spanish control focused on the northern coast of Yucatan, where he founded settlements at Salamanca de Campeche and other locations that provided bases for inland expansion. However, these early colonial establishments faced constant pressure from Maya attacks, supply shortages, and tropical diseases that decimated Spanish personnel unfamiliar with the environmental challenges of the Yucatan Peninsula. The Maya response to Montejo's invasion involved sophisticated military and diplomatic strategies that demonstrated the continuing vitality of indigenous political institutions despite the pressures of foreign conquest. Maya leaders coordinated resistance efforts across traditional political boundaries, forming temporary alliances that transcended the factional conflicts that had characterized late post-classic period politics. The siege of Campeche in 1534 exemplified this coordinated resistance, as Maya forces from multiple polities combined their efforts to isolate Spanish settlements and prevent the establishment of permanent colonial control. Maya military tactics during these resistance campaigns showed remarkable adaptability as indigenous commanders learned to counter Spanish technological advantages through innovative strategies and tactical modifications. Maya warriors developed techniques for neutralizing Spanish cavalry advantages by fighting in dense forest environments where horses could not maneuver effectively, while also learning to construct fortifications that could withstand Spanish firearms and crossbow attacks. The use of fire arrows and incendiary devices demonstrated Maya ability to adapt traditional weapons to new tactical requirements created by Spanish military technology. The psychological dimensions of Spanish Maya warfare involved complex interactions between European concepts of military honor and indigenous traditions of warfare that emphasized capture over killing. Spanish soldiers, trained in European military traditions that emphasized decisive battlefield victories, often found themselves frustrated by Maya tactical preferences for guerrilla warfare, strategic withdrawal, and prolonged sieges that avoided direct confrontation while maximizing Spanish casualties and resource expenditure. Maya warriors, conversely, had to adapt their traditional emphasis on capturing prisoners for sacrifice to the new reality of facing enemies whose primary objective was territorial conquest rather than ritual warfare. Francisco de Montejo the Younger continued his father's conquest efforts during the 1540s, establishing the colonial capital at Mérida in 1542 on the site of the abandoned Maya center of Tahoe. The selection of this location demonstrated Spanish understanding of Maya settlement patterns and their desire to appropriate existing infrastructure while symbolically asserting colonial authority over indigenous political centres. The construction of Spanish colonial buildings using stones quarried from Maya pyramids and temples represented both practical resource utilisation and deliberate cultural domination that sought to erase visible symbols of indigenous political and religious authority. The encomienda system implemented in conquered Maya territories created new forms of social and economic organisation that fundamentally altered traditional Maya community structures. Spanish encomenderos received grants of indigenous labour and tribute that theoretically provided protection and religious instruction in exchange for specified services and payments. However, the practical implementation of encomienda obligations often involved exploitation that exceeded traditional Maya tribute systems in both quantity and character, creating economic pressures that disrupted established patterns of agricultural production, craft specialization, and community organization. Maya responses to encomienda demands involved various forms of resistance ranging from passive non-compliance to active rebellion that demonstrated the persistence of indigenous political organization despite Spanish colonial control. Community leaders developed strategies for minimizing tribute burdens through negotiation, legal challenges, and selective cooperation that preserved some degree of local autonomy while avoiding direct confrontation with colonial authorities. The maintenance of traditional agricultural cycles, religious observances, and social hierarchies within the constraints of colonial administration required constant adaptation and negotiation that tested the resilience of Maya cultural institutions. The survival of independent Maya kingdoms in the Petén region represented the most successful form of indigenous resistance to Spanish conquest, with Tayasal maintaining complete autonomy until 1697. The Itza kingdom's island capital on Lake Petén Itza provided natural defensive advantages that Spanish forces found difficult to overcome with 16th and 17th century military technology. The lake's geography required Spanish attackers to approach by canoe across open water, where they were vulnerable to Maya archery and had limited tactical flexibility, while the Itza defenders could retreat to prepared positions on the island's interior if outer defences were breached. The Itza political system during the colonial period combined traditional Maya governance structures with innovations developed in response to the external pressures created by Spanish expansion in surrounding regions. The kingdom maintained diplomatic relations with other Maya communities while providing refuge for populations fleeing Spanish colonial control, creating a multi-ethnic society that preserved diverse Maya cultural traditions within a unified political framework. Archaeological evidence from Tayasal indicates continued construction of traditional Maya architecture, maintenance of calendrical systems, and performance of religious ceremonies that demonstrated the persistence of indigenous cultural practices throughout the colonial period. Spanish attempts to conquer the Petén region involved multiple expeditions that consistently failed to establish permanent control over Itza territory. The expedition led by Hernán Cortés in 1525, while en route to Honduras, encountered the Itza but chose not to attempt conquest due to logistical constraints and the need to continue his primary mission. Later expeditions specifically targeting the Itza kingdom faced challenges including difficult overland transportation through dense tropical forests, limited supply lines, and effective Maya resistance that prevented the establishment of permanent Spanish settlements in the region. The final conquest of Tayasal in 1697 by Martin de Ursua represented the culmination of over 150 years of Spanish efforts to complete their control over Maya territories. Ursua's expedition succeeded where earlier attempts had failed through superior organization, better understanding of regional geography, and the construction of a road system that enabled the transportation of artillery and supplies necessary for sustained military operations. The capture of Tayasal involved both military action and diplomatic negotiation, as some Itza leaders chose to surrender rather than face destruction, while others continued resistance until overwhelmed by Spanish forces. The process of forced conversion to Christianity throughout Maya territories involved systematic destruction of indigenous religious infrastructure, combined with the construction of Catholic churches and monasteries that served both spiritual and political functions. Spanish missionaries, primarily Franciscans, developed strategies for Christian evangelization that incorporated selected elements of Maya religious traditions while eliminating practices considered incompatible with Catholic doctrine. The destruction of Maya codices, religious sculptures, and ceremonial objects represented deliberate efforts to erase indigenous religious knowledge while forcing Maya communities to adopt new spiritual frameworks. Maya responses to Christian evangelization demonstrated remarkable creativity in preserving indigenous religious concepts within the framework of Catholic practice. The phenomenon of religious syncretism involved the identification of Catholic saints with traditional Maya deities, the incorporation of indigenous ceremonial elements into Christian rituals, and the preservation of Maya calendrical systems within Catholic feast day cycles. The survival of Maya religious practices often required secrecy and careful adaptation that allowed indigenous communities to maintain spiritual continuity while avoiding persecution by colonial authorities. The impact of European diseases on Maya populations created demographic catastrophes that fundamentally altered the social and economic foundations of indigenous communities. Smallpox, typhus, measles, and other infectious diseases introduced by European contact spread rapidly through Maya populations that lacked immunity to these pathogens, causing mortality rates that may have exceeded 90% in some communities. The timing of these epidemics, often preceding or accompanying Spanish military campaigns, created conditions that facilitated conquest by weakening Maya resistance capabilities while disrupting traditional political and social institutions. Archaeological evidence from colonial period Maya sites reveals the dramatic population decline that accompanied European contact through changes in settlement patterns, agricultural systems, and craft production. Many late post-classic centres experienced complete abandonment during the 16th century, while others showed evidence of severe population reduction and cultural disruption. The collapse of traditional trade networks, craft specialization, and political hierarchies created conditions where surviving Maya communities had to develop new adaptive strategies for maintaining cultural continuity under colonial rule. The demographic recovery that began during the 17th century involved the gradual rebuilding of Maya communities through natural population increase, migration from less affected regions, and the adaptation of traditional social institutions to colonial circumstances. Maya communities developed new settlement patterns that balanced the requirements of Spanish colonial administration with the need to maintain access to traditional agricultural lands and sacred sites. The congregation policy implemented by Spanish authorities, which sought to concentrate dispersed Maya populations into centralized towns, created new forms of community organization that combined indigenous and European settlement models. Colonial period Maya communities maintained traditional agricultural practices while adapting to new crops, animals, and farming techniques introduced by Spanish colonization. The introduction of European domestic animals, including cattle, pigs, and chickens, provided new sources of protein and materials, while also creating new challenges for traditional agricultural systems based on forest management and crop rotation. Maya farmers learned to integrate these new elements into existing agricultural cycles while maintaining the cultivation of traditional crops including maize, beans, squash, and chile peppers that remained central to indigenous diet and cultural identity. The persistence of Maya languages throughout the colonial period represented one of the most successful forms of cultural resistance, as indigenous communities maintained their linguistic diversity despite Spanish efforts to promote the use of Spanish in official contexts. Maya communities developed strategies for preserving their languages through oral tradition, religious instruction, and community governance that ensured intergenerational transmission of linguistic knowledge. The creation of alphabetic writing systems for Maya languages by Spanish missionaries paradoxically provided new tools for indigenous communities to preserve and transmit their cultural knowledge in written form. Colonial period Maya literature, including the Popol Vuh, the books of Chilam Balam, and other indigenous texts, demonstrated the continuation of sophisticated intellectual traditions that combine traditional Maya knowledge with new influences introduced through European contact. These texts preserved historical narratives, religious concepts, astronomical knowledge, and cultural practices that might otherwise have been lost during the disruptions of conquest and colonization. The authors of these works showed remarkable skill in adapting European alphabetic writing to Maya linguistic structures, while maintaining the content and meaning of traditional oral narratives. The economic transformations that accompanied Spanish colonization created new opportunities and challenges for Maya communities as traditional production systems were modified to meet colonial demands while maintaining subsistence needs. The introduction of new crops including wheat, sugarcane, and various fruits expanded agricultural possibilities while also creating new labor requirements and market relationships. Maya communities became integrated into colonial economic systems through tribute payments, labor obligations, and market participation, while maintaining traditional exchange networks and production techniques adapted to local environmental conditions. Craft production during the colonial period showed both continuity with traditional Maya techniques and adaptation to new materials, tools, and market demands created by European contact. Maya weavers continued producing traditional textiles, while also learning to work with European materials including wool and silk that provided new possibilities for artistic expression. The production of religious art for Catholic churches created opportunities for Maya artists to maintain traditional skills while adapting iconographic programs to Christian themes and European aesthetic preferences. The legal systems that governed colonial Maya communities involved complex interactions between Spanish colonial law and traditional Maya legal practices that created hybrid institutions combining elements from both traditions. Maya communities maintained traditional mechanisms for resolving disputes, managing community resources, and regulating social behavior while adapting to Spanish legal requirements and administrative procedures. The survival of indigenous legal concepts within colonial legal frameworks provided mechanisms for cultural continuity that enabled Maya communities to maintain some degree of autonomy despite their subordination to Spanish colonial authority. Resistance movements throughout the colonial period demonstrated the persistence of Maya political organization and cultural identity despite centuries of colonial domination. The Great Maya Revolt of 1761, led by Jacinto Canec, represented the most significant indigenous uprising in colonial Yucatan, involving coordinated attacks on Spanish settlements and attempts to restore independent Maya political authority. Although ultimately unsuccessful, this rebellion demonstrated the continuing vitality of Maya political consciousness and the potential for organized resistance to colonial rule that would influence later independence movements. The independence movements that swept through Latin America during the early 19th century fundamentally altered the political landscape governing Maya territories, though the immediate benefits of liberation from Spanish colonial rule proved largely illusory for indigenous communities. When Mexico achieved independence in 1821, followed by the Central American republics in the 1820s, Maya populations found themselves subject to new nation-states whose policies toward indigenous peoples often proved more assimilationist and economically exploitative than those of the departing colonial administration. The liberal ideologies that drove independence movements emphasized individual citizenship and private property rights that directly challenged traditional Maya concepts of communal land tenure and collective political organization. The Mexican state of Yucatan, where the largest concentration of Maya populations resided, experienced particular tensions as newly independent governments sought to integrate indigenous communities into national economic and political systems. The henequen boom that began in the mid-19th century transformed the Yucatecan economy through large-scale cultivation of this fiber-producing agave plant, creating enormous profits for plantation owners while subjecting Maya workers to debt peonage systems that differed little from slavery. Hacienda owners used various mechanisms including company stores, manipulated wage calculations, and legal restrictions on worker mobility to maintain captive labor forces that provided the manual labor essential for henequen cultivation and processing. Maya communities responded to these new forms of economic exploitation through various resistance strategies that built upon centuries of experience adapting to external domination while preserving cultural autonomy. The caste war of Yucatan, which erupted in 1847 and continued intermittently until 1901, represented the most sustained indigenous rebellion in Mexican history, involving coordinated military campaigns that at their peak controlled over half of the Yucatan Peninsula. Maya rebels, led by leaders including Cecilio Chi and Jacinto Pat, employed traditional guerrilla warfare tactics adapted to modern firearms while maintaining complex political and military organizations that governed liberated territories for over 5 decades. The rebel Maya established their capital at Chan Santa Cruz, where they developed a unique religious and political system combining traditional Maya beliefs with Catholic elements and new revelations delivered through a speaking cross that provided divine guidance for military and political decisions. This syncretic religious movement enabled Maya rebels to maintain unity across traditional factional divisions while providing ideological justification for continued resistance against Mexican government forces. The Speaking Cross cult demonstrated the continuing vitality of Maya religious innovation and its capacity to adapt traditional spiritual concepts to contemporary political challenges. The military organization of the rebel Maya during the caste war showed remarkable sophistication in adapting traditional warfare practices to 19th century conditions. Maya commanders developed strategies for obtaining modern firearms through trade with British Honduras, established manufacturing facilities for producing ammunition and maintaining weapons, and created supply networks that supported sustained military operations across vast territories. The rebels' knowledge of local geography and their ability to retreat into dense forest areas where government forces could not effectively pursue them provided tactical advantages that enabled small Maya units to defeat much larger Mexican army formations. The eventual suppression of the caste war involved massive military campaigns that employed scorched earth tactics designed to destroy Maya agricultural systems and force rebel populations into submission through starvation and displacement. Mexican forces, supported by federal troops and modern artillery, systematically destroyed Maya villages, agricultural fields, and forest refuges while establishing fortified positions that gradually reduced rebel-controlled territory. The final capture of Chichen Santa Cruz in 1901 marked the end of organized Maya resistance, though isolated groups continued guerrilla activities for several more years. The aftermath of the caste war created conditions that facilitated unprecedented exploitation of Maya labor and resources as defeated communities lost legal protections and territorial rights that had provided some security during the colonial period. The expansion of henequen plantations accelerated dramatically after 1901, with hacienda owners acquiring vast territories formerly controlled by rebel Maya, while implementing labor systems that reduced indigenous workers to conditions approaching slavery. Maya families found themselves bound to specific plantations through debt obligations that could never be repaid, while children inherited their parents' debts and continued the cycle of exploitation into subsequent generations. Archaeological rediscovery of Maya civilization began during this same period as European and American explorers ventured into the tropical forests of Central America, seeking evidence of the ancient cultures whose ruins dotted the landscape. John Lloyd Stephens and Frederick Catherwood's expeditions during the 1840s produced the first systematic documentation of major Maya sites including Copan, Palenque, and Uxmal, with Catherwood's detailed architectural drawings and Stephens' vivid descriptions introducing Maya achievements to international audiences for the first time. Their publications, particularly incidents of travel in Central America, Chiapas and Yucatan, created widespread fascination with Maya civilization, while also establishing many of the romantic stereotypes about lost civilizations that would influence popular perceptions for over a century. The early archaeological investigations that followed Stephens and Catherwood's pioneering work were often conducted by amateur enthusiasts, whose primary interest lay in collecting spectacular artifacts rather than understanding Maya culture through systematic scientific investigation. Desire Charnay's expeditions during the 1880s employed early photographic techniques to document Maya sites, while also removing numerous sculptures and architectural elements for European museums. These early collecting expeditions, while contributing to international awareness of Maya achievements, also established patterns of cultural appropriation that removed important artifacts from their original contexts, while providing little benefit to contemporary Maya communities. The development of professional Maya archaeology during the early 20th century coincided with major advances in understanding Maya hieroglyphic writing and calendrical systems that had puzzled scholars since the colonial period. Ernst Forstermann's work on the Dresden Codex during the 1880s and 1890s achieved the first successful decipherment of Maya numerical and calendrical glyphs, demonstrating the mathematical sophistication of Maya astronomical calculations. His recognition that Maya scribes had developed positional notation and the concept of zero independently of Old World mathematical traditions established Maya intellectual achievements as comparable to those of any ancient civilization. The establishment of major archaeological projects at sites including Chichen Itza, Tikal and Copan during the 1920s and 1930s marked the beginning of systematic scientific investigation of Maya civilization using modern excavation techniques and interdisciplinary research methods. The Carnegie Institution's work at Chichen Itza, directed by Sylvanus Morley, combined architectural restoration with detailed recording of hieroglyphic inscriptions, while also conducting ethnographic studies of contemporary Maya communities. This integrated approach recognized the connections between ancient Maya achievements and the continuing cultural traditions of their modern descendants. Tatiana Proskuriakov's breakthrough recognition during the 1950s that Maya hieroglyphic texts recorded historical events rather than purely astronomical and religious information revolutionized understanding of Maya civilization by revealing the political complexity and dynastic histories that had governed classic period city-states. Her analysis of monument sequences at Piedras Negras demonstrated that Maya scribes had recorded the births, accessions, military victories and deaths of specific rulers, transforming Maya studies from the investigation of anonymous ceremonial centers into the examination of dynamic political systems governed by identifiable historical personalities. The accelerating pace of hieroglyphic decipherment during the 1960s and 1970s, led by scholars including David Kelly, Floyd Lounsbury, and Linda Shelley, revealed the sophisticated historical consciousness that had characterized Maya intellectual culture. The recognition that Maya writing combined logographic and syllabic elements enabled scholars to read increasing numbers of texts, revealing detailed information about Maya political organization, religious beliefs, and cultural practices that had been preserved in stone inscriptions for over a millennium. The decipherment achievements transformed understanding of Maya civilization, while also providing contemporary Maya communities with access to their ancestors' written records. Modern archaeological techniques including remote sensing, ground-penetrating radar, and LiDAR surveys have revealed the true scale of Maya civilization by identifying thousands of previously unknown sites throughout the Maya region. The LiDAR surveys conducted in northern Guatemala since 2016 have revolutionized understanding of Maya settlement patterns by revealing extensive urban areas, agricultural systems, and defensive installations that had been hidden beneath forest canopy for centuries. These discoveries indicate that Maya population densities during the Classic period may have approached those of contemporary urban areas, requiring sophisticated systems for resource management, waste disposal, and social organization. The application of advanced analytical techniques including stable isotope analysis, ancient DNA studies, and paleo-environmental reconstruction has provided unprecedented insights into Maya diet, health, migration patterns, and environmental adaptations. Analysis of human remains from Maya sites has revealed information about social stratification, disease patterns, and demographic changes that complement the historical information preserved in hieroglyphic texts. These scientific approaches have demonstrated the value of interdisciplinary collaboration in understanding the complexity of Maya civilization, while also raising important questions about the ethical responsibilities of researchers working with indigenous cultural heritage. Contemporary Maya peoples, numbering approximately 7 million individuals distributed across Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and El Salvador, maintain cultural traditions that demonstrate remarkable continuity with their ancient heritage, while also adapting to modern circumstances and challenges. Maya languages, including Quichua, Cachiquel, Mam, Quechua, and Yucatec, continue to be spoken by millions of people who have preserved oral traditions, agricultural knowledge, and religious practices that connect them directly to their pre-Columbian ancestors. The diversity of Maya languages and cultural practices reflects the regional variation that has characterized Maya civilization throughout its history, while also demonstrating the resilience of indigenous cultural systems. Language revitalization efforts throughout Maya communities have achieved significant success in preserving and promoting indigenous languages, despite centuries of pressure to adopt Spanish as the primary means of communication. Maya educators have developed bilingual education programs that teach children to read and write in their native languages, while also providing them with the Spanish language skills necessary for participation in national economic and political systems. The Academia de Lenguas Mayas de Guatemala and similar organizations in other countries have standardized writing systems for Maya languages, while also promoting their use in literature, media, and official government communications. Traditional agricultural practices continue to play central roles in Maya community life, with many families maintaining milpa farming systems that combine maize, beans, squash, and other crops using techniques developed over millennia. These agricultural systems provide both subsistence security and cultural continuity by preserving knowledge about plant varieties, soil management, and seasonal cycles that connect contemporary Maya farmers with their ancestral traditions. The polyculture techniques employed in Maya agriculture have attracted increasing attention from agricultural scientists seeking sustainable farming methods that maintain biodiversity while providing reliable food production. Maya textile traditions represent one of the most visible forms of cultural continuity, with women throughout Maya communities continuing to weave elaborate huipiles, cortes, and other garments using techniques and designs that preserve ancient symbolic meanings, while also incorporating contemporary materials and aesthetic preferences. The geometric patterns, colour combinations, and symbolic motifs employed in Maya textiles often encode information about the weaver's community identity, social status, and religious beliefs, creating a complex visual language that maintains cultural knowledge across generations. The international recognition of Maya textiles as art forms has created new economic opportunities for indigenous women, while also raising concerns about cultural appropriation and the commercialization of sacred symbols. Religious practices in contemporary Maya communities demonstrate the continuing vitality of indigenous spiritual traditions despite centuries of Christian evangelization and cultural suppression. Maya daykeepers, known by various titles including Ajay and Jaymen, maintain traditional calendrical knowledge and perform ceremonies that connect community members with ancestral spirits and natural forces. These religious specialists preserve knowledge about the 260-day sacred calendar, agricultural ceremonies, and healing practices that provide spiritual guidance and community cohesion, while adapting to contemporary circumstances and legal restrictions on indigenous religious practices. The syncretism that characterizes much of contemporary Maya religious practice combines elements from traditional Maya spirituality with Catholic and Protestant Christian beliefs in ways that enable indigenous communities to maintain cultural authenticity while participating in broader religious communities. Maya Catholics often identify traditional deities with Catholic saints while preserving indigenous ceremonial practices within the framework of Christian worship. This religious flexibility has enabled Maya communities to maintain spiritual continuity while avoiding the persecution that often accompanies more overt expressions of indigenous religious beliefs. Land rights struggles represent one of the most persistent challenges facing contemporary Maya communities, as traditional territorial boundaries and communal land tenure systems conflict with national legal frameworks that emphasize individual property rights and commercial development. Maya communities throughout Guatemala, Mexico, and other countries have organized to protect ancestral territories from mining operations, hydroelectric projects, and agricultural expansion that threaten both environmental sustainability and cultural survival. These land rights movements have achieved some legal victories, while also facing violent repression from government forces and private security companies employed by development corporations. The Zapatista movement in Chiapas, Mexico, which began with an armed uprising in 1994, represents the most visible contemporary expression of Maya political resistance and cultural autonomy. the Ejército Zapatista de Liberación Nacional, composed primarily of indigenous Maya communities, has established autonomous municipalities that govern themselves according to traditional practices, while also implementing innovative approaches to education, healthcare, and economic development. The Zapatista movement has attracted international attention to indigenous rights issues, while demonstrating the continuing capacity of Maya communities for political organization and cultural innovation. Environmental threats facing Maya territories include deforestation, mining operations, climate change, and large-scale development projects that disrupt traditional ecological relationships and threaten the environmental foundations of Maya cultural practices. The construction of hydroelectric dams on Maya rivers has displaced communities while destroying sacred sites and disrupting agricultural systems that depend on seasonal flooding patterns. Mining operations in Maya territories have contaminated water sources while also desecrating sacred mountains and burial grounds that hold central importance in indigenous cosmology and religious practice. Climate change has created new challenges for Maya agricultural systems as changing precipitation patterns, increased temperature variability, and extreme weather events disrupt the environmental conditions that have supported traditional farming practices for millennia. Maya farmers have demonstrated remarkable adaptability by developing drought-resistant crop varieties, modifying planting schedules, and implementing water conservation techniques that draw upon traditional ecological knowledge, while also incorporating new technologies and scientific information. These adaptive strategies provide models for sustainable agriculture that could benefit broader efforts to address climate change impacts on food security. Economic marginalization continues to affect Maya communities throughout the region, as limited access to education, healthcare, and economic opportunities perpetuates poverty and social exclusion that began during the colonial period. Maya families often face difficult choices between maintaining traditional lifestyles in rural communities with limited economic opportunities or migrating to urban areas where they may achieve greater economic success but risk losing cultural connections and linguistic abilities. The remittances sent by Maya migrants working in the United States and other countries provide crucial economic support for rural communities while also creating new forms of cultural exchange and transformation. The development of Maya cultural tourism has created new economic opportunities while also raising complex questions about cultural commodification and the representation of indigenous heritage for outside audiences. Archaeological sites including Chichen, Itza, Tikal and Calakmul attract millions of visitors annually, generating significant revenue for national governments while providing limited direct benefits to Maya communities living near these sites. Some Maya communities have developed community-based tourism initiatives that provide visitors with authentic cultural experiences while ensuring that economic benefits support local development and cultural preservation efforts. Educational initiatives throughout Maya communities have achieved significant progress in reducing illiteracy rates, while also promoting indigenous language maintenance and cultural knowledge transmission. Maya universities and educational institutions have developed curricula that combine traditional knowledge systems with contemporary academic disciplines, creating new opportunities for indigenous students to pursue higher education while maintaining connections to their cultural heritage. These educational programs have produced a new generation of Maya professionals who work as teachers, healthcare providers, lawyers, and community leaders while maintaining strong commitments to indigenous rights and cultural preservation. Maya intellectual property rights have become increasingly important issues as pharmaceutical companies, agricultural corporations, and research institutions seek to commercialize traditional knowledge about medicinal plants, agricultural techniques, and other indigenous innovations. Maya communities have organized to protect their intellectual property while also seeking mechanisms for sharing traditional knowledge in ways that provide benefits to indigenous communities rather than simply extracting resources for external profit. These efforts have contributed to broader international discussions about indigenous rights and the protection of traditional knowledge systems. The political participation of Maya peoples in national governments has increased significantly since the 1990s as indigenous rights movements have achieved greater recognition and political representation. Maya politicians have been elected to national legislatures, municipal governments, and other official positions where they advocate for indigenous rights while also working to address broader social and economic issues affecting their countries. The election of indigenous presidents in Bolivia and other Latin American countries has created new possibilities for indigenous political participation, while also demonstrating the continuing challenges of implementing meaningful political change within existing institutional frameworks. International recognition of Maya cultural achievements has grown substantially as archaeological discoveries, artistic exhibitions, and cultural exchanges have introduced global audiences to the sophistication and continuing vitality of Maya civilization. The designation of Maya archaeological sites as UNESCO World Heritage Sites has provided international protection for important cultural resources, while also creating obligations for host countries to preserve and manage these sites according to international standards. These international recognition efforts have supported Maya cultural preservation, while also raising awareness about contemporary challenges facing indigenous communities. The digital revolution has created new opportunities for Maya cultural preservation and revitalization as communities use internet technologies, social media, and digital archives to document traditional knowledge, promote indigenous languages, and connect Maya communities across national boundaries. Maya language websites, online dictionaries, and digital storytelling projects have made indigenous cultural resources more accessible while also creating new venues for cultural expression and political organizing. These digital initiatives demonstrate the capacity of Maya communities to adapt new technologies to serve traditional cultural goals while also creating new forms of cultural innovation. Contemporary Maya art and literature have achieved international recognition as indigenous artists and writers create works that combine traditional cultural themes with contemporary artistic techniques and global perspectives. Maya painters, sculptors, poets and novelists have gained prominence in national and international cultural scenes while maintaining connections to their indigenous heritage and community responsibilities. These artistic achievements demonstrate the continuing creativity and cultural vitality of Maya peoples, while also challenging stereotypes about indigenous cultures as static or backward-looking traditions. The future of Maya civilization depends largely on the success of contemporary communities in balancing cultural preservation with adaptation to rapidly changing global circumstances. The challenges facing Maya peoples today, including environmental degradation, economic marginalization, political exclusion, and cultural suppression, require innovative solutions that draw upon both traditional knowledge systems and contemporary resources and technologies. The resilience that has enabled Maya communities to survive and maintain their cultural identity through centuries of external pressure provides a foundation for addressing these contemporary challenges while preserving the cultural heritage that connects modern Maya peoples with their extraordinary ancestral achievements. The continuing vitality of Maya civilization, demonstrated through the persistence of indigenous languages, agricultural practices, religious traditions, and political organization, offers hope that these remarkable cultural traditions will continue to evolve and flourish in the 21st century. The growing international recognition of indigenous rights, combined with the increasing political organization and cultural pride of Maya communities themselves, suggests that the next chapter in Maya history may witness a renaissance of indigenous cultural expression and political autonomy that honors the past while embracing the possibilities of the future. The story of Maya civilization, spanning over 3 millennia from the earliest agricultural villages to contemporary indigenous rights movements, stands as a testament to the enduring capacity of human communities to create meaning, beauty, and social organization even under the most challenging circumstances, ensuring that the legacy of one of humanity's greatest civilizations will continue to inspire and inform future generations.